opening of the window with 95 green, and we went. So uh, that's right, exactly right. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Launch Director Bob Sieck. JoAnn Morgan is truly a pioneer in our business. One of the first women in management for our program. She was the first woman engineer to serve in the Launch Control Center. She enjoyed the sponsorship, if you will, of Kurt Debus and Rocco Petrone, two of the giants in our program. And I think probably the best description of JoAnn comes from JoAnn herself. She is not a hidden figure. JoAnn Morgan, ladies and gentlemen. Oh.
Okay, thank you.
Joe, it only has to be good enough, right? Well, I think what we'd like to do is we'd like to open up with some statements from each of our guests, and from there we'd move it into Q&A. So, John, could we start with you, please? Let's have your thoughts today.
I didn't know I was supposed to make a statement, but you know, I'm a very fortunate guy. I chose to come to the United States in 1961 because the British space program was literally dying on the vine at that time, and boy, did I step into it. You know, I got here just in time for Alan Shepard's first flight. I got to work on John Glenn's flight. I got to work on the first Ranger to the moon, the first Mariner to Venus, and I was absolutely hooked. I came originally for 2 years, and I thought, I ain't ever going back. And here I am, you know, some 60 years later, still badged, still working out there as a docent, and it's just been the most incredible career I could have ever imagined, and I've been very, very lucky.
Jay, let's hear from you, please.
It took a lot of work to pull that video together. Mark and I spent an untold number of hours going through picture upon picture upon picture, and we had a story that was that at best was boring. And then my son-in-law Sandy got a hold of it and put animation into it, and all the, instead of me saying John Kennedy made a speech, he showed the speech, and then Nicole was willing to contribute by doing what I thought was a professional job of narration. So I hope everybody enjoyed it. I know there's some comments, and I encourage you to let us know what they are. But thank you for attending.
Bob Sieck, welcome aboard.
Well, I think the best way to summarize the importance of the space program is what inspired me was when I was a college student. Prior to that, a military brat moved all over the country, and I was going to make a career in the military. But when the Russians launched Sputnik, I said, well, that's interesting. And shortly after that, my parents moved down here to this paradise of Florida, and I was able to drive out on Cocoa Beach, drive on the beach. I said, no, I think my trajectory is going to be something to do with this space program. I could work at this place that's just off in the distance. They try to launch rockets, and I think that would be a better trajectory, and it worked out that way. I joined NASA after some mandatory military time. There was a draft in place, and since then enjoyed a long career with NASA, and like John Tribe, have been a docent for about a quarter of a century. And it's a reminder, and people ask, well, what's your major takeaway from that kind of career? And I think the real message is we're just ordinary people all the way from the initial rocket launches to what we're enjoying today. But working together, you can perform extraordinary things. And I think that should be the takeaway, particularly for the youth that is here. You know, you can do great things, and you get to use this. Don't forget how to Google your brain, because this electronic stuff is great for collecting data, but you have to use this to turn it into information and make decisions. And working in the space program is a good place to learn how to do that.
JoAnn Morgan.
Well, as a senior in high school here, in the 1956, 57, 58 time frame, my dad worked for the Army. And as some of you who might have been at my Friday night presentation, I was very lucky because both my parents had security clearances, and when I applied for a job with the Army, NASA hadn't been formed yet. I got it. And in fact, Jay and I both worked for that Army Ballistic Missile Agency when it was a fairly new organization. But as a college student, all through Mercury, I got to have a little bit of association with Mercury, working in tracking and telemetry and instrumentation. So coming in at the beginning and getting rolled into the new NASA, I was extremely fortunate to have such good mentors, people who were tops in the industry. And I'd like to say the importance of men as mentors, since there were no women ever in my entire career at a level to mentor me, it was the men that made the difference, because they told me how I should behave and what to do, and they encouraged me to continue questioning and being fearless. And my good friend Jerry Griffin, who was our deputy director at KSC and then the director out in Houston at the Space Center there, he said, we used to say, oh, there's a problem over there, let's throw JoAnn at it. But I want to congratulate Jay and his media team for this wonderful, really, truly excellent history, and I wish every school kid in the world could see it. Right at the beginning, he pointed out the importance of Canada as part of the team, a very little known fact to many people in the industry, but certainly not to the public. And one of the strengths that this program, our space program, has done is to make the world notice, as a team, the world notice the Earth and the space. For me, coming into the industry, it was about new knowledge. The thing that grabbed me the most with Explorer 1, our first satellite, was, my gosh, we discovered the Van Allen belt, verified this little thin blue line around our planet and how important it was. To me, at a 17-year-old age, I thought, this is new knowledge. And I was a curious person, and I love learning things. And I have to say, my entire 45-year career with NASA, I learned something every day. I never had a dull day. I did have some bad days, never had a dull day, and I worked with some truly wonderful people.
Well, we want to take this opportunity to open our panel up for questions and answers. In order to gain as many questions and people as possible, we'd like you to limit it to one question per person. Now, if you have a question for a particular panel member, please identify that panel member and then have at it. Otherwise, if you'd like to throw it out to the group, we'll certainly take it. So let's open it up to Q&A right here in the front.
So this question question, I just got a copy, I'm in for Gemini, and I noticed that they're using the term Gemini. Can you explain how the Gemini and Gemini debate has come, and which one's accurate?
I can't answer it. I read not very long. As a matter of fact, I'm about halfway through a book that Ronnie Wood recommends that I read called The Race for the Moon. It's written by a guy named Donovan, I believe. And in there he says that the correct answer was that it should be like Jiminy Cricket. But I didn't tell Nicole how to pronounce it, and how she chose to do that was okay with me.
I think for a lot of folks,
And just one other comment. JoAnn mentioned the Canadian participation. There's also an interesting book out that's called Arrow to the Moon, which is the story of those Canadian people that came down here. And again, it's a fascinating story because John says when he goes through the litany of how he finally got here after multiple attempts to get into the country and get approved and be able to work out here. When they canceled that airplane, they put 15,000 engineers on the streets on one Friday afternoon. The Space Task Group on Monday morning sent a team of people up there to interview them. They interviewed a large group, and on Wednesday they said, come back tomorrow and we'll tell you who we want to come work. So they came back and they said, we'll take you 30 guys and we want you in Langley, Virginia on Monday morning. So they got no time to go through any government rigmarole to get through the system. They just showed up on Monday morning in Virginia and they went to work. But it's an interesting book because they were significant contributors, not just contributors, but significant contributors, and their contributions continued with the arm on Space Shuttle was done by the Canadians. They're a partner in Space Station, obviously, and will be, in spite of everything else going on in the world, will be as we go forward.
another question back there. Yes, sir?
It wasn't glossed over, but Nicole mentioned STS-1 was the only first flight that had people on board before or after, and we've seen, Artemis didn't, Starship won't. What was the significance of having people? How'd you feel about the decision, or, how'd you feel on launch day to have someone on board the first flight, which will probably...
Well, those of us that were part of that activity looked at it as having been involved in the previous human spaceflight constructs, we'll call it, for the previous program, starting with Mercury. Said, well, you got to give the message we got as a team members that it's all about the crew and their mission. Don't forget, if you may be a nerdy engineer and you're responsible for this stuff here, but ultimately our customer in this is the flight crew and the importance of their mission. So never lose sight of that. So we looked at it as kind of risky. Said, well, they at least ought to have engines on the orbiter, so if when they're landing, they could have the ability to maneuver and this sort of thing. But that was not to be. Well, they got ejection seats. They can always eject. Yeah, well, ask any military pilot what's the last thing they want to do other than save their lives. It's to get out of that airplane that's not flying like an airplane anymore. And they said, well, that's it. We think there's a difference between accepting a risk and gambling. Okay, and not just in the dictionary, but it's a different. Wagering something of value is a dictionary thing, and the crew in this case would say, well, we look at it as accepting a risk. We're not just gambling. We know that all the technology available to humankind is in this vehicle. We still got a chance to get out if we pull the eject thing, just like we were trained to as military pilots. so we're good enough with that. And so I wouldn't say it was a miracle. We're thankful that it worked in that respect, and they never had to use it during the test phase. But we were accepting a lot of risk. We were a less risk-adverse society back then than we are today. I don't know if we could get by with it today. That's just a perception as a guy getting old and cynical, but that's the way I look at it.
And the pilot side of them, they'd had the approach and landing verification, which was, that was what was big and new, is landing this stuff. Because launch is a controlled explosion, and we've done launches many, many, many times before. But landing, the fact that they got to do that, I think that gave a lot of confidence to a lot of people in the program.
And that was one of the great debates. The other one was, well, should we do an RTLS, return to landing site abort, halfway up, rather than going on to orbit? And because we're not sure, we want to make sure that all the engines work properly, but let's come back and land, and it's not safe to go on to orbit. So there was a big debate back and forth. Once they decided to put the crew in there, well, are they going to let them fly all the way to orbit or not? Lots of interesting debates back in those days. There was one big one on whether or not there should be windows in the orbiter. And Max Fugere, the chief engineer at Fornas out in Houston, he wanted to take all the windows out to save weight. and he wanted to use all, because it's going to have auto-land capability. Well, you couldn't find an astronaut in 10 countries that was willing to want to fly that thing without having to depend on an auto-land with no windows. So that solved that debate pretty quick.
Yeah.
Yes,
And,
ma'am, but way back in the back, there's
yeah,
Museum website, we had a question from Noelle Stevenson from Fort Lauderdale who asks this question. The moon dust, she wants to know if she read this or if it's true, that the moon dust was like broken glass. And if it was like broken glass, what kind of disaster did it create when man first landed in glass?
You want me to take that, Jay?
I don't want it.
There wasn't water enough ever on the moon to tumble rocks. You know how if you I have a house in Montana and I live on a large lake, and all the rocks in the bottom of the lake are tumbled because they've been in a glacier. Well, there's never been such a thing on the moon. So moon dust is sharp and spiky, and it sticks on their suits and things. But we learned from rovers that we've sent to the moon that sticky stuff is very dangerous because it can penetrate into corners and cracks. And in fact, the dust can lay on the solar panels if you have something, so you have to learn how to dust be gone, reverse polarity magnetically and things like that. But yeah, it is definitely a problem on the moon, and has been taken into consideration in a lot of the construction of space suits and equipment that's going there.
okay, question right here.
I have a question for JoAnn. When you were first hired, you said that your mentors were men. During your time there at KSC, how many men did you mentor versus when were there finally enough females around that you could mentor females?
Quite a few. As a matter of fact, the young man who's acting director of the Space Center, Kelvin Manning, worked for me 25 years ago. Yeah, over the time, I mentored men and women, and in that first, I'd say, first 20 years, well, in fact, in 1969, the year we went to the moon, there were only 17 technical women in the whole center. There were a lot of women there because there was a lot of paperwork, so a lot of clerks and secretaries. I mean, you know, we didn't do things on computer. We could stack up paper and walk to the moon, in fact. So, but those first 17 women, many were computer software people. There was one woman guidance engineer who came late in the program. There was a woman biology person who worked with the medical team. There was one woman, the first civil engineer to graduate from the University of Tennessee, Jeanette Denny, later Jones, married an engineer there. She had a civil engineering degree and was working in Oak Ridge. And I remember when they first hired her, and it was like 63, 64, right when I got out of college, because I'd been there as a summer student working. They sent her application to me and said, should we hire this woman? And her specialty was in sewage treatment. And I said, her degree doesn't really make sense because we knew construction-wise the Corps of Engineers was going to come in and really bird dog a lot of that infrastructure part as the center was being built. But she was working at Oak Ridge and had project management training. And none of us, nobody in the place had project management training. So that was something that a skill that we were missing. So I pointed that out, and they did hire her, and she actually made it up the ladder faster than me because the project management side, the planning, budgeting, scheduling, and integrating that was something a lot of engineers didn't want to do, but Jeanette was happy to do that. So yeah, it was a different time because there weren't women in college. When I went to the University of Florida, no woman got a degree that year in engineering, and the next year only one. So, you know, and Florida had only been a co-ed school for 10 years, so it was a different thing. Now, I've been working with the University of Miami since 2013, and only 15% of their entering freshman class were women. I was just down there last spring, and 50% of the freshman class of engineers are women down there. So, you know, big change. And, the government and companies couldn't hire engineers if they didn't get a degree and get out of college.
Question right over here.
I'd like to ask for John Tribe, as a contractor on the panel here, what do you see? How have you seen the evolution of working with NASA as a contractor from the Mercury days through Apollo to Space Shuttle, and now what we're seeing with the commercial crew program? I'd be interested to hear about what the relationship is like with NASA.
Well, when I started, it was on a NASA project, you know, on the Ranger, Mariner, Mercury projects, but we were really working for the Air Force at that time because I was an Atlas engineer, so we were working, you know, with the Atlas ICBM, and I was used to having sort of one Air Force manager on the launch complex, and one or two Air Force inspectors. And that's the way we did business. You know, we wrote the paperwork, and they eyeball it pretty much, and we'd go off, and we were hands-on, and we were really running the show. And then I got switched over to Mercury, and that was a revelation. Now NASA was totally involved. So whereas I'd been used to, you know, a quality guy coming in every now and again, I now had them sort of living in my back pocket. And I remember a step like remove flame bucket covers, you know, which was you just told the technician to go do it. I got over to the pad 14, and it took 3 inspectors to verify that we removed the flame bucket covers. And I thought, you know, this is overkill. But, you know, that was a necessary requirement back then when we were getting into manned space flight, to have that redundancy and that oversight. So we got used to working with the government, and the engineers would literally, we'd almost be 1 for 1 during the Apollo program, which was, again, we got used to it because the badges, we just kind of threw them aside. We were one team. And we each knew what our functions were, and it worked well. We had good engineers and bad engineers on both sides, and we knew, how to get the job done. We worked on up into Shuttle, and it was pretty much a continuation of that same approach. I began to see, as the Shuttle program became operational, that the contractor was calling more and more of the shots. And I think NASA realized that also. And I'll be frank, I don't think NASA was happy with Rockwell at the time in the early 80s being as strong as they were. And that was one of the drivers that led to the shuttle processing contract moving from Rockwell to Lockheed, where they could sort of take a fresh breath with a new contractor and make sure they had control of the program. And that was to my mind today, I can say it was a terrible mistake. I think personally that we could have graduated from those early 80s into the late 80s and 90s as maybe a commercial operation on the shuttle program. But the working, to get back to your basic question, the contractor relationship with the government was always, I don't know, I thought it was pretty good, and today I still feel like I'm a contractor because I never did. I've got a NASA badge on now, but I never got a paycheck from NASA ever, other than through the contractor. So it's and I still feel like I just wanted the team. It was a great relationship, and it still is. These are my buddies today, even though they're lifetime NASA employees. But it's as far as the SpaceX aspect, Jonathan, I don't know. It's a different world. It seemed like at the end of the shuttle program in 2011, there's been a gulf since then. There's a big canyon between the end of the shuttle program and today. And there's very little communication from the commercial guys back to the old timers, back to the guys that finished up on the shuttle program. They have no link to the SpaceX and Blue Origin people today. When we have retiree groups, when we have meetings of all the people that worked out there, these new commercial people don't show. They're not interested. Don't tell us how you did it. We know how to do it. And that's a worrying thing for me as we move on into the future. Just recently, I've seen a little more of SpaceX coming and saying, can you help us with this? I did a briefing to the guys that just went out on the West Coast for the recovery on lessons learned. And that's the first time that SpaceX has ever come to us to say, help us. Yeah. So I don't know. It's a really uncertain situation now, Jonathan. It's not clear in my mind, but I do feel like we've lost something in the last 10 years of continuing. We went from the 50s right through to the end of the shuttle program with really overlapping programs and continuation. And now we're starting anew. And it's interesting to see how it comes about.
Well, there's an old adage about things are done the way they're done because of a reason. And if you're going to change them, you ought to at least understand the reason why they are like they are now.
So I want to follow up on John's expression of concern. I have experienced outreach from SpaceX starting many, many years ago when they invited me to come out after one of their launches and do a pad walk around with them. And they had an incident where they buckled a tank, and they'd gone back and researched what we did in Apollo when we had an incident and buckled a tank. And they had me chat with employees and talk to them, and it was a very young team. And I appreciated that. And they had several women on their team, and I think probably they invited me because I was a woman and they wanted to, and I'd been a safety and mission assurance director. And when they got started out in Texas, they had invited me to come down there, but I couldn't. I was traveling abroad a lot, and in India and Australia and Japan and other countries. So I couldn't go down there. And a couple of times I still get an invite from them. Could you come to Texas and talk to us? And I said, why do you care? And they said, well, we love something you said when you spoke down in Florida to our little launch team is the women were asking about harassment and all that. And you said, hey, first do your job. And that's how I left him. It said, we like that you told people first do your job. You're hired to do something, do your job.
Let's take another question right over here.
Of the space shuttle program, because I've been following space since the in the 60s when I was a kid, and I remember there was a lot of talk of upgrades like Shuttle C, which would have been an amazing thing, taking cargo up to the space station. There was a lot of talk of replacing the solid rocket boosters with liquid boosters. What happened to, I think it was that a lack of money why these things never happened?
I think those were primarily decisions made by funding. There also was, the booster was going to be replaced by a thing called a filament wound case that went away when during the Challenger downtime, they ran out of money to go pursue. So most of those, I can't remember now exactly why Shuttle C didn't go very far, but there was a early idea of flying a tank, an empty tank, and then converting it into a space station once it got on orbit. And I mean, lots of people got lots of ideas, but not much money kind of deal.
Take another question right over there.
First, thank you all for your contributions. It's just fabulous to be here to listen to you. This is kind of a follow-on to Jonathan's question. We're living in a new space era. There are new rockets, there are new spacecraft, new ideas from companies that didn't even exist 10 to 15 years ago. I'd just like to get your impressions of this new space era. And since I talk to a lot of students about careers in space, what advice can I share with them that you might have based on your own careers? Thank you.
Well, I'll take a stab at it. I had the pleasure of visiting some of the new startups, the really small companies, and I'll just pick out Viaspace. Okay, they're local in the area, very small workforce. They're building essentially everything, including their power plants, their engines, the turbo pumps, using 3D printers and composite materials. It's a true out-of-the-box approach to spaceflight and rocketry, and the young men and women, probably 50% ratio that I talk to in this company, are totally invigorated to work on this program because it is new thinking, new technology. They're, for the most part, they're on a trajectory, I'll call it, to work on this and make it work. And if they fail, that's okay. They're young, they're invigorated, they're smart. I'd have a hard time getting even into college today when I compare what this slow student had in his capability back in the 50s. But they're adventurous. And the whole concept of sending people and payloads into space a new way has just invigorated them to say, well, I'm going to work on this. And if it doesn't work, that's okay. I'm young, I'm smart, I'll find something different to do. But right now, this is what I want to do. And so as we move forward, anything we can do to inspire the youth of our country to get inspired about, we want to go to Mars. Some people want to go to Mars. Well, it's still basic physics, so there ought to be a way we can make it happen. It's just utilize the resources that we have, give us more, and we'll find a way to do it. That kind of attitude is what it's going to take to actually get to Mars someday or build a habitat on some other body, because this species can't stay here anymore because we used up the planet. Whatever the reason may be, the youth in this country are willing to do it. Just give them a chance, give them the resources, enable, and they'll find a way. Of course, that's the thinking of an engineer. That says we can solve any technical problem, just give us the time and the resources, and we'll make it happen. But you gotta love it.
Let's go ahead and take a couple more questions right here.
This one's for Jay. Hi. The fact that the federal budget always impacts what happens with spaceflight, it always seems to have more of an impact on science programs. And from what I've seen over the years, NASA really has never done a great job at communicating the value of the science of unmanned programs to the public, and how the things discovered through those programs and through human spaceflight actually impact and help us all on Earth. Where do you see the potential for expanding that kind of communication to let folks know, hey, these programs are very important. Don't keep cutting their funding.
Well, for starters, the budget that just came out cut all all those kinds of things substantially, from what I understand.
No. Oh, and I think that part of the problem is, for those of us who who are over 50, I'd say, maybe even a little younger than that, how to navigate all of the data that are available to you is much harder. I know, I mean, I was born in 1940, so it's very hard for me. First of all, my hands don't work so good anymore because I have arthritis. And I think young people today, if they want to see that potential, they know how to get on the internet and find it. There's tons of information on there. NASA's got all kinds of data available, and it's appropriate for different levels. There also are a lot of books out. I mean, an author, Suzanne Slade, I've helped her with editing several books on science. So you can go to Amazon and look for books on science, and you'll find things that relate to NASA. So, you know, part of this is a non-problem. It's all of it has to come from an interest level. If the interest level is not built into a child in the preschool and elementary school area and junior high school, then if the data are there, they're never going to find it. And NASA's not given money to market to the public. We don't advertise as such. There's a NASA channel. You can go there. You can learn. There's NASA websites. You can go there. But, you know, in terms of how industry can market science, you know, the pharmaceuticals are very good at it. They're always on TV with ads about new drugs you can buy. But see, NASA doesn't get money to do that. We're forbidden from doing that. So, but you're right. Things that are discovered by NASA lay fallow. And part of that's the problem with industry. I give you two examples. First of all, back in the 60s, a guy named Adam Calle was a telemetry engineer, and he had a patent that he was granted for related to cochlear ear implants. His patent lay fallow for 40 years before a hearing company embraced it and a couple of other and came up with a cochlear implant so that somebody who was deaf could hear. Another is we at KSC had developed a paint that we'd use at the pad on our structures. We had a big array of paint samples and chemistry of how we could get these paints that would rust-proof some of our structures at the pad. And we had offered that to industry. None of the paint companies in the United States took it. Some people in Amsterdam came over. They loved it because they did a lot of shipbuilding. And so they're using our technology. But, you know, part of this is, you know, the American companies were going, in the 80s and 90s, were going abroad. Multinational corporations were going abroad to get labor and build things. And so they weren't picking up patents like that. So
We are going to have another guest come up here shortly, and in just a moment, we're going to ask our panel to step in front of the table so the photographers can get a shot at you. But at this time, I'd like to suggest a very warm round of applause for our Legends panel today. John Tribe, Jay Honeycutt, Bob Sieck, and JoAnn Morgan. For Mike, could we have the mic on for Jay for a moment, please? That's the problem, you can hide back there.
I just want to say there are 6 young men here from North Carolina State that are engineering students that are sitting in the back here. And if you have an opportunity, to chat with them, please do so, because they're very bright and they're very interested in what we're doing, and we need them if we're going to continue to do this for another 50 or 100 years.
One of the things I enjoyed doing was we created a thing called Take the Boss to Work, similar to Take Your Child to Work Day. So the boss we invited to come down and work with the technicians on the orbiter was at the time the center director, Jay Honeycutt. So brought him down there, didn't tell the technicians, didn't tell anybody else who he was. He came down dressed in clothes to go and work on the orbiter and that. Eventually, they found out who he was by checking his badge, because around the flight hardware, we did not wear our badges. They stayed outside. That was part of our safety procedure. But he came down, signed him with a female mechanic, and he went with her that day and did everything she had to do to go to work, going to logistics and getting the materials she needed, checking out her tools, getting a quality for the job, everything she had to do, and took Jay with her inside the aft compartment of the orbiter in OPF-1 to go to work. When they finished up that in the morning, and everybody by then had figured out who he was, he said, "That was such a great experience, I want to come back and do it again." So he came back and worked in other areas of the orbiter, even got to work on the thermal protection system and remove a tile off the nose landing gear door. So, Jay, I want to again thank you for coming down there. Jay and I have been friends for a long time, but yeah, he's just was such a great guy to come down there to work. And then fellow center directors after that wanted to be part of the program and came down to spend different times with the technicians working. So, and it helped them for the decisions they were making in the office, because there was things that by the time it gets all the way up to the top of the food chain, it's not the true story. So he would come down and say, "Now I want the truth." So. Yeah. All right. Thank you, sir. All right. Okay. And my other message is, at the end of the program, just like several of the people up here on the panel and that, I became a docent. I spent most of my time at the Atlantis exhibit at the Visitor Center answering questions to people from all around the world about the Space Shuttle Orbiter, because I happen to be one of the people of the team, but I did do the original build of all of the orbiters, so, yeah, and process them for 135 flights. So, at any rate, but while I'm up there as a docent, at lunchtime I would go over, because they used to have a thing called Lunch with an Astronaut, and the astronaut of the day, you could go sit down and have lunch with them, and they would talk about their experiences of being an astronaut while the guests were all eating lunch. Well, I would go over there and sit down and have a cup of coffee, because I would get asked questions about what went on in orbit, which I never went to. So I had to go with it. I said, well, never been there, but I learned this from the astronauts, and I would attempt to answer the questions. Well, one day, astronaut Steve Smith was up there giving his presentation. I was sitting in the audience drinking coffee, and he's talking away, and in the middle of his presentation, he just stops. Doesn't say a thing. He just looks at the audience. And everybody's looking around like, what's happened to that? And he looks out and he says, even astronauts have heroes. You know, and he goes, my hero is sitting right there. And he points at me. And he says, Terry White is one of the people that worked so hard to get our vehicles ready, to carry us to space safely, to allow us to do our job, and then return safely back to Earth. So he said, he is my hero. So after the luncheon was finished, I went over and said, well, thanks a lot. He says, oh, but now you have an assignment. He says, anytime you see someone else who you know worked in the Space Shuttle program, you have to give them that message. So Mark has me do this every year, to sit there and tell the audience, and there are other people in this room that I work with in the shuttle program and that, but to let them know that the astronauts consider them heroes. So thank you.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you again, Jay. Magnificent. And again, a shout out to all the workers out there, whether you be from Shuttle, Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, whatever. Thank you. Thank you so much for your contributions. You all made it possible. Our next guest needs no introduction. Bye. He is a veteran of 4 space shuttle missions, and among them my favorites, 83 and 94. And he has been privileged to see this program in a very unique light. And he is also the author of a book entitled Orbit of Discovery, which happens to be available around here, I understand. But my particular data point for this gentleman is he has an irrevocable point in history. He is the first human being to eat real pizza in space. They used to give guys the sandwiches in the suit pocket in case they got hungry, either out on the pad or getting up on orbit. And Don went to the kitchen. I'm not lying, am I? You went to the kitchen and you asked if you... A pizza, a slice of pepperoni pizza. So you're looking at the first gentleman, the first human being to eat pepperoni pizza in space. But he's also... He's also a very good friend. It's my privilege to introduce my friend, Don Thomas.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate that. You probably have a pretty good indication this isn't going to be the most serious presentation that you've had here today. But I'm really honored to be here at the ShuttleFest. I want to thank Mark and the whole museum staff. You guys have been working tirelessly pulling this event together. And to be here with all the space enthusiasts from around the world, it's a great pleasure for me. And to be here with Eileen and Joe Tanner and John Grunsfeld. And last night I bumped into Bill MacArthur up on the space bar. We watched the launch up there last night. just to be here with some of my colleagues, it's like, wow, what a special moment. We don't get to do this very often. We'll bump into each other, and when we do, it's really special. So Eileen, a fellow hairball from my class of 1990. It's great to be here with everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. We're going to talk about the day a woodpecker attacked the space shuttle. And many, many people consider this one of the most important and most memorable moments of the entire space shuttle program. And when I say many people, I'm talking about my family and my friends, okay? So it takes place, the scene of the crime is at Cape Canaveral here. You're all familiar with the view of the Kennedy Space Center from orbit. On my first flight, I launched in 1994 aboard Space Shuttle Columbia, and I just happened to glance out the window, about an hour and a half after launch, and I saw Tampa Bay. I said, wow, we're coming up on Florida. So I stayed at the window, and 10 seconds later, we're passing over the Kennedy Space Center. And I saw a view like this. I'm looking down at my launch pad, pad 39A, and I thought, wow, I have just been around the world one time, and I knew my family was still stuck in traffic waiting to get back to their hotels in Cocoa Beach, and it put it in perspective for me. But there's the Kennedy Space Center, and as you all know, this is part of the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge. Established in 1963, we have 15 federally listed threatened and endangered species, more than 500 species of wildlife, more than 1,000 species of plants. So it's really a unique area here, and with a lot of incredible wildlife that has to be protected. You've seen many of these before. I love coming down and looking at the manatees. The wild boar in the lower right, I'm a city boy from Cleveland. I've never seen wild boar up there. But to watch them here, near dawn or dusk, you'll see them on the edge of the road. It's just such incredible wildlife, the alligators and the bald eagles and the sea turtles. It's also home of the northern flicker woodpecker. And these woodpeckers like to live in open habitats near trees. They, generally eat insects, but they also eat nuts and berries. And they often, drum on a metal object to claim their territory and to scare other woodpeckers away. And they're a protected species here at the Kennedy Space Center, which means they cannot be harmed. So this is the crew from STS-70. We got selected, it was about in 1994 or so there were 5 of us. Kevin Kriegel on the far left-hand side was our pilot. In the center, Tom Hendricks, the commander. I'm on the lower right-hand corner. And then Nancy Curry and Mary Ellen Weber in the back row. So we had 5 astronauts. Our mission was to deploy a tracking and data relay satellite that you see in the upper left-hand corner there. And this was a satellite that was built to replace the one lost on the Challenger. So it was a great honor for us to finish up, the mission of the Challenger crew. So we got assigned as a crew, and at our first crew meeting, we're looking around the table, and we realized it was kind of a unique crew, that 4 of the 5 of us were from the state of Ohio. Tom Hendricks in the center was from Toledo, Ohio. Nancy Curry in the back row was from near Dayton, Ohio, and Mary Ellen and Weber and I were both from the Cleveland area. It's only that guy on the far left, Kevin Kriegel, he wasn't from Ohio. He was from New York. And he wasn't just from New York, he was from Amityville, New York. So you've probably seen the Amityville Horror. So that's where Kevin was from. So this is our official crew picture. And I don't know if there's probably not a lot of people here from Ohio, but can you pick out the New Yorker in the picture there? We didn't think this was very fair to exclude Kevin from our Ohio celebration. So we had the idea to write to the governor of Ohio and see if there was any way we can make Kevin an honorary Ohioan. So I called the governor's office in Columbus, Ohio, and I explained, hey, I'm Don Thomas, one of the shuttle astronauts. We have 4 of the 5 astronauts from Ohio. We'd like to see if the governor could make our New Yorker an honorary Ohioan. And then they said, what do you want? And I explained it again, and then I heard, and who are you? And they transferred me to another office, and we started the whole routine again. Who are you? What do you want? They transferred me. I finally ended up with the person who's in charge of proclamations for the governor explained it, and they said, yeah, we can do that. So they made an official proclamation. This is George Voinovich, who was later a senator, but at this time he was a governor of Ohio. And we presented this to Kevin at one of our crew meetings. And he had a big smile on his face as we presented this to him until he started reading the fine print. So here it says, Kevin Kriegel, NASA astronaut, as an honorary Ohioan, thus extending to him all rights and privileges held dear by all citizens of our state. And Kevin, the smile went away when he read this, and he says, does this mean I have to pay taxes in Ohio now? We said, no, you're good. And then he had a smile again. So we had the all-Ohio Space Shuttle mission. And Nancy is an alumna from Ohio State University, so she helped with the design of the patch and came up with the black O there, which is designed after Ohio State University. Tom Henricks, our commander, said, hey, that's a little too obvious, and we'll never get that approved. So we changed that outer ring from the scarlet to the black color there. And we didn't tell anybody what this patch represented. This was just our shuttle patch, and once NASA headquarters approved it, then we said, this is for Ohio. We wrote to John Glenn. He was on the very first all-Ohio crew. And, right? So we invited him to come to the launch. He was, because of his Senate duties, he couldn't do that. But he came down to the Johnson Space Center and spent a full day with us training, just went around with us. John Young was his escort for the day. And to see those two, icons of the space program walking around. John Glenn hadn't been to the Johnson Space Center in decades. It had been a long time. He didn't come down there for his annual physical. He would do that in Washington. But he came down there, spent the full day with us. And we were in the simulator with him, practicing some launches and landings. And Tom Henricks let John Glenn sit in the commander's seat and try some launches and landings there. And I'm sitting right behind John Glenn. And first time he landed, he bounced at one time. It was a good landing, but he bounced. The second, third one, perfectly smooth. And at one point during the training, he turned around and he had this sheepish grin on his face. And he said, if we knock off that New Yorker, I know how we could make this the real all-Ohio shuttle mission. And then it was like a year and a half later, I hear he's going to be flying on Space Shuttle Discovery on STS-95. I think that was the moment that he got the idea in his head that I can do this, coming down there to visit with us. So here we are out in California, in LA, where they built the, TRW built the tracking and data relay satellites. We went out there for the day and just visited the workers there. They had it all shipped up, packed up and ready to ship here to the Kennedy Space Center. This is maybe, 5 or 6 months before the launch. There's our inertial upper stage that would take the satellite out to geosynchronous orbit. And this is how they would pack it in the vertical, what's that called, Mikey? Payload canister to get it out to the launch pad. And this is from the Challenger mission, but just showing you how it would be configured in the payload bay. It was quite a large satellite to go back there. So they got it ready in Terry's shop here, and then they rolled it over to the VAB. They stack it up with the external tank and the solid rocket boosters, and then they rolled it out to the launch pad. It was going out to pad 39B. And they put it down on the launch pad there. Then you see on the left-hand side of the picture the rotating service structure. And this rotates across the front of the shuttle, like you see here. And it protects the shuttle from, rain or hail damage. And it has a lot of access platforms for the workers to access all parts of the shuttle. So it's all ready on the launch pad. This is, again, maybe a month or so before our launch. And then on May 31st, 1995, this was just 1 week before our scheduled launch. We were going into quarantine that evening, and I left a training simulator at the Johnson Space Center that morning, and the instructor said, hey, Don, I think your mission may be delayed. It seems like a woodpecker just attacked your space shuttle. And I laughed, and I ran up to the crew office, and Tom Hendricks is in there. I says, Tom, is it true? And he says, yeah, I'm afraid so. So this one single woodpecker ended up making 205 holes in our fuel tank. And if I could have the video clip. I should have some shark music going along with this. So this is the woodpecker. It drilled 205 holes. Most of them were about an inch or so across. The biggest one was about 4 inches or so. But I have to tell you, 2 things really impressed me about this. One was that it was only one woodpecker that did 205 holes. It wasn't like a flock of them came down. It was just this one single woodpecker. That's one persistent woodpecker, right? The second thing that impressed me about this was that NASA had about 100 hours of video. You got to let that sink in, right? As the woodpecker, it would drill in, finally get to the aluminum tank underneath, couldn't go any further, and it would move over a few feet and drill another hole, and then another hole, and somebody operating the camera, number 161 or whatever number, they would move it, focus, zoom in, and we'd watch the woodpecker, and then it would move over here. And I always wondered, why didn't somebody stop this after, say 25 holes or 50 holes? But nobody did, and this woodpecker ended up making 205 holes in the insulation. Okay, back to the PowerPoint. So again, the scoreboard here, woodpeckers just 1, and the holes that it made, 205. So the press got wind of this and made a lot of fun of NASA. I just clipped some of the headlines there. Wings clipped by woodpeckers, and birds poke holes in scientists' plans. So they were making a lot of fun at NASA, like how could your big bad space shuttle get taken down by a little tiny woodpecker? So NASA, first thing they wanted to do was to go assess all the damage. So they brought in cranes, put up scaffolding. The idea was maybe we can patch these holes right out at the launch pad, and maybe we can get going in another week or 2. So they brought in all kind of scaffolding. Down there in the lower right-hand corner, you see Joe Tanner. He was one of our Cape Crusaders, right? He was out there helping them assess the damage. And they finally said, it's not safe to patch this out at the launch pad. So they made the decision they're going to have to roll it back to the vehicle assembly building there, and that's what they did. So here's one of the workers. They had spray-on foam insulation, fill the hole, little popsicle stick, smooth it out, sand it down, and then go on to the next hole. And then they rolled it back out to the launch pad, and we were ready to go again. Almost ready. Because before we could launch, before they could even get out to the launch pad, NASA wanted to make sure that this never happened again, right? It was bad enough that Woodpecker had stopped the program once, but they wanted to make sure it would never happen again. This is the backside of the tank, a picture that I took just to show you some of the patched holes there. So again, NASA still had this problem. How do you prevent the woodpeckers from doing this again? So NASA, as only NASA can do, formed a team of people. They called it the Bird Team. This is a true story. Like, they had a sense of humor here. That's the Bird Investigation, Review, and Deterrent Team. And they got this group of people together and to figure out how do we keep this from happening again. The first solution that just popped out, was, get a gun and we'll shoot the woodpecker. We can't do that, right? This is part of the National Wildlife Refuge. And I have to tell you, it's also never a good idea to shoot a gun at a rocket out on the launch pad. So thankfully, they ruled that idea out. Another concept was to paint the orange tank blue. Evidently, woodpeckers don't like the color blue. I don't know if that's true or not, but that would add 400 to 600 pounds of weight, so NASA ruled that one out. Another idea was to spray the tank with skunk cabbage juice. Again, I'm a city boy from Cleveland. I've never smelled skunk cabbage juice. I've got a good mental picture of that. Not only would it scare the woodpeckers away, but also the workers and the astronauts, so they didn't do that. This was another concept. I actually got this from Becky Bolt, who was a member of the bird team, and she said that was one of the concepts to keep the woodpeckers away. But what they ended up doing was putting these big beach balls that you see there at the bottom with eyes on them, predator eyes. And these are the eyes of a hawk or an eagle or an owl. And the concept is a woodpecker comes flying by, sees a huge set of eyes and says, oh, there's a big hawk over there, big eagle, I'm not going anywhere near that space shuttle. And they put them all over the launch pad. And these are called terror eyes or predator eyes. They use them a lot in farming, to keep birds away from the crops, but they had them all over, even at the very top. We were here for the rollout, the second rollout from the VAB out to the launch pad, and I was just chuckling at this. It's like they're rolling it out 1 in the morning. You got these big diesel engines powering the crawler transporter, making, a lot of engine noise. And I thought, there's no woodpeckers out here at this time of day, but NASA was making sure, and they had one of those balloons on top. I thought it was a nice touch. There's just some more of the balloons there. They also had workers out there on patrol out at pad 39B. This gentleman here has an air horn, and if he saw a woodpecker, he could blast it to scare him away. They had people with water cannons, like super soakers, on patrol, and if they saw a woodpecker, they could squirt water and shoo them away. So again, you can scare them, but you can't harm them at all. And they had these plastic owls. You see these at outdoor restaurants as well. And they put these all over the launch pad. So they pulled out all the stops. So I showed you the patch, and we were known as the All-Ohio Space Shuttle mission. But after this unfortunate event, it got changed a little bit. Now, I'm taking great offense at your laughter here, because if you notice whose name Woody Woodpecker is covering up, it happens to be Don Thomas. This was made by one of the workers in Mission Control in Houston. I wished that they had produced these before we flew. I would have been proud to have that on my launch and entry suit. So after that, we became known as a Woodpecker crew. Here's a cartoon. It says we made a slight design change. It scares the woodpeckers away. Put a little beak on the shuttle. I like this one, 2 aliens. Something called a woodpecker put holes in it, and we can't take off. So there was a lot of attention, not necessarily positive attention, that NASA was getting from all of this. And one of the workers at the Kennedy Space Center put this sign up, and it just says, Official Woodpecker External Tank Training Post. So everything we do at NASA, it's all about training. So we had a telephone pole, on site there that the woodpeckers were welcome to come and do whatever they wanted there, but to stay away from the launch pad. And some of the workers had embroidered shirts with this design on there, STS-70 Kennedy Space Center Drill Team. So they had all the fixes, they patched all the holes, they had ways to keep the woodpeckers away, so it was time to get on with the mission. As we were in quarantine at the Johnson Space Center for 4 days, and then 3 days before launch, we get on our T-38s and fly here. And if the weather is nice, they let us do a pad flyby. We drop down to about 1,000 feet and circle around the launch pad once or twice. And it is such an incredible sight to look out the window and see your space shuttle on the launch pad, ready to go, just waiting for the astronauts. And here we are coming in. You always get the butterflies going in my stomach. It became very real at this point. So here we are, launch morning, heading out to the launch pad. Tom Hendricks is leading us there. I had a camera with me. I just took this picture out the front of the Astro van as we're driving up to pad 39B there. You don't see the shuttle as you're driving in. You make one final turn, and there maybe a quarter mile or half a mile straight ahead is pad 39A. And again, when you see your shuttle there, it's like, wow, very, very real. We had police escorts. We never had to stop for red lights at the Kennedy Space Center. And we take the elevator up here. I'm standing outside of Space Shuttle Discovery. They load us up in our seats one at a time, so I'm just waiting for my opportunity. That's a view. We were out there just before, right around sunrise. It was beautiful. Here I am in the white room, and our team there is helping me put on the parachute harness. They'll check all my gear, and once everything looks good, I get on my hands and knees, crawl on that white board, and we had people inside to strap us into our seats. So it's pretty quiet inside. You know, typically the first hour we're doing pressure checks, communication checks. We're telling jokes. It's pretty light mood, but the last hour you're in there, it's no more chit chat, no more joking around, no more talking unless it's related to the mission. But then 6 seconds before liftoff, the main engines start, and then suddenly you feel a shove in your back as the solid rockets boosters light, and you know you're on your way here. This is a picture of my wife holding my son. My son was 5 months old, so he was born between my first and second mission. My wife's eyes, if you look at where she's staring, it's right at the shuttle. And people ask me, well, is your son impressed that you're an astronaut? And I always refer to this picture. He's looking at a bug down on the ground or something like that. So 8.5 minutes later, we're in orbit. We separate from the ET, and we take pictures of it always. They were particularly interested if there was any damage from all the woodpecker holes, and we didn't notice anything like that. I think Kevin Kriegel called down that we saw some feathers floating around, but that tank looked really good. And our mission was to deploy the tracking and data relay satellite, and I was primarily in charge of that. That was the main task, and we deployed this thing 6 hours after launch. So usually the first day, you're kind of adjusting, you're unpacking, setting things up. When you have satellites like this with upper stages, you want to get them out of the payload bay, get them out of there as soon as you can. So 6 hours into the mission, we deploy this. So it's a really busy first couple of hours of your flight. We tilted up at like a 58-degree angle, and I was in charge of the deployment. So the very last step of the procedure is to push the deploy button. And I pushed that button. Thank you. All right, there's somebody. You know, my family says, well, I could push that button. It's a very complicated button and takes a lot of training. But this satellite inches its way out of the payload bay, and I'm watching this over the overhead windows, and I'm not sure this thing is going to clear the windows. It looks like it's coming so close to us. The engineers had done the work, and it cleared. You know, it moves off, and maybe this is 100 feet away or so. We would have liked to just watch this thing fade into the darkness there, but we had to do a separation burn. That engine's going to fire in about 20 minutes. We don't want the shuttle anywhere near that solid rocket motor, so we had to say goodbye to the, after this training, we trained for a year or so for this mission, get to watch the satellite, for maybe 15 minutes or so, and then you got to get out of there. And today it's out of geosynchronous orbit and still operating. This is 30 years after we deployed it. It's still out there operating. So our flight director, who was Rob Kelso in Mission Control, he had one firm rule. He said, no woodpecker jokes until after the satellite is successfully deployed. And because that was the whole, mission here, was deploying the satellite. So there were no woodpecker jokes up until that point. But after, there was a lot of woodpecker jokes. This is a message that Mission Control sent up to us. This is message number 30, or whatever, 23, and it's titled Pre-Launch Photo. And it's got the giant woodpecker. They changed the name from Discovery to Spruce Goose. And then they put this little note in the lower right-hand corner. It says, we promise this is the last woodpecker joke. I've been at Capcom and Mission Control. They're really good people, but I knew they were lying on this. It's like, nah, no way. I took along a book that I've had since I was a kid. John Glenn had put out. It was called P.S. I Listened to Your Heartbeat, and it was a collection of letters that young students had sent to him after his first mission. So I took that up to space, thinking, well, I want John Glenn to orbit the Earth aboard the space shuttle. Little did I know, a couple of years later, he would be doing it himself. This is Nancy Curry on the exercise bike. I came down in the middeck one day, and she's just upside down working her upper body. She was a real exercise enthusiast, and it would just seem really funny to watch somebody upside down pedaling away. And here's Woody Woodpecker. We did get to orbit. We opened up some of the lockers to get out equipment, and Woody Woodpecker came floating out. the launch team here had gotten it from Universal Studios in Orlando, and they put that on board. So Woody Woodpecker was our unofficial mascot and talking on our amateur radio here. And one day we got up in the morning, and Kevin Kriegel had pulled the window shades away from the pilot's window there, and we saw a little ding in the window. So we talk about space debris, and we got hit by something in the middle of the night. On another one of my missions, I was looking out the overhead window having lunch, and I saw a little dot on the window, and I says, oh, that must be some of my tang. So I took a napkin to clean it up, and it didn't disappear. And I looked carefully, and it was a little crater in the window. So here we had a small crater, maybe a 1/16 of an inch across or so. The shuttle windows are about 2.5 inches thick, 3 panes of glass. So, you know, we saw this, and it didn't look like a major incident. We discussed it a little bit. Should we tell the ground or not? And Tom Henrik says, yeah, we got to tell them. You got to tell the team on the ground exactly what happened. Let the engineers analyze this. They came back, and they said it's not an issue at all. So we got this little cartoon from Mission Control. What really happened to Window 6, and the two astronauts are chatting. Hey, did you hear that? Oh my heavens, it sounds like it came from near Window 6, and you look out the window, and there's Woody Woodpecker. So if anything went wrong on this flight, guess who got blamed? It wasn't the crew. And here we are taking some crew pictures up there. I'm holding a banner, Case Western Reserve University, where I went to college, got my bachelor's degree. And I just want to show you a picture or two looking out the window. It's the most incredible opportunity to see our Earth from 200 miles up, and I loved looking out the window. That's the Earth just from 200 miles up. This is from my first mission, one of our Space Lab missions. That little blue line at the bottom of the Earth, that's the atmosphere. And it's this glowing bright blue, and the blackness of space, I've never seen a color like that. It's a darker black color than I've ever seen. And I had seen pictures of the Earth like this. You know, I had 20 or 30 hours of Earth observation training. But the first time I looked out the window, I just went, oh, and you'll hear that gasp from every astronaut the first time they gaze out the window. Here's a sunrise from space, 16 sunrises, 16 sunsets every 24-hour day. And I never got tired of watching these. And this is one of the last pictures during the mission up on the flight deck. I was sitting on the middeck for the landing, so came up there, took some pictures. That's Mary Ellen Weber, Nancy Curry, and me, and then Tom Henricks would be the commander in the lower, just off the picture there on the right-hand side, and Kevin Kriegel on the left. So we do the engine burn, came back to Earth, landed back here at the Kennedy Space Center. We actually had bad weather here on our intended landing day, and they kept us up there another 24 hours, and then we were able to land the next morning. Here's Tom Henricks. He's taking a look at how close did he come to the center line of the runway. This is an incredible tribute to the navigation and our piloting skills that our astronauts like Eileen has, all of our shuttle commanders who landed the shuttle. You know, we would land typically 30, 40 feet from the exact predicted touchdown place, and maybe you're 2 or 3 inches off the center line of the runway. So it's always amazing. We got to do this walk around after we landed. If you were feeling good, they'd let us do this, and it was always like an incredible treat to see the shuttle from the outside. It's almost a perspective that we would never see. And here's the whole crew in front of Discovery there, giving thumbs up. Now, a month after the flight, after we landed, we came back to the Kennedy Space Center to thank the workers, the incredible team of people, many who are sitting right in this room here today. And we came down to thank them. They had a little festival, and they invited Woody Woodpecker over from Universal Studios to join us. So we couldn't shake this woodpecker thing at all. The last time the crew got together was in 2008. It was the 50th anniversary of the founding of NASA. And they had at the Glenn Research Center up in Cleveland, Ohio, they invited all the Ohio astronauts. And they weren't going to invite Kevin. He said, well, he's a New Yorker. I said, no, he's an honorary Ohioan. How could you have a reunion of Ohio astronauts and not have Kevin? So they relented, and Kevin came up there, and that's our crew. And here's all the rest of the Ohio astronauts. Not all of them are there, but many of them are. You see Neil Armstrong in the center, John Glenn, Jim Lovell. There's me. To my right there is Sunita Williams, just came back as well. Really amazing group of Ohioans here. And today's Space Shuttle Discovery is at the Air and Space Museum in Washington. I live about an hour and a half from there, and I love going down there. You know, I've walked, you know, visited the Air and Space Museum since I was, you know, a kid, and to go into the museum today, and I can say I was inside that thing. It's really amazing for me to do that, and I do tours and share that, but I love seeing that. I love seeing Atlantis here, and it's such an incredible program. And I've got this book. Would be happy to sign it, you know, for you if anybody's interested in that. So one last thing. This wasn't the first woodpecker attack. You know, a few years after I wrote my book, I was going through a book. It was just called The History of the Thor program. The Thor was like an early version of the Delta rocket. And in the last chapter of this book, they had like 2 or 3 pages about a woodpecker attack. And this was in 1960 at pad 17B, and a woodpecker came up to some insulation material and kept drilling holes in it. And this is before there was the Merritt Island National Wildlife Refuge. So what they did, they put a big tank of compressed nitrogen under the location where the woodpecker was, you know, tearing up the insulation. And the woodpecker came one day, they released the nitrogen gas, and this is the unofficial report, says that the woodpecker tumbled slightly, pitched southeast downrange, and was never seen again. So what is the legacy of the woodpecker attack? You know, I was out at pad 39B a couple of years ago when they had Artemis 1 out on the launch pad. This is the day or 2 days after they had rolled it out to the pad, the first rollout. I was talking to some of the workers there, and I mentioned, you know, I launched from this pad, and we had the woodpecker attack us there. And he told me, you know, they still put the plastic owls and those predator eye balloons, they still put them out there. And they did that through the end of the shuttle program. We're still doing that, you know, for the Artemis program. So what a legacy, right? So with that, thank you very much, everybody.
We have got time for a quick Q&A, but before that, I don't think Mark will mind me making this announcement. But next year at ShuttleFest 5, for all 3 days, our special guest is going to be the woodpecker who poked those holes into the STS-70 tank. He's got a full presentation, and he'll be available for autographs and pictures after the show. Let's have some questions for Don Thomas. Open it up right here in the front. Here you go, Don.
Did John Glenn bring anything from Don Thomas with him? I don't think so at all. But I'll tell you this story. At the Air and Space Museum in Washington, they have the Wright Flyer, the Wright brothers plane is there on display. And off to the side in a small corner, they have a little display item. And it's a piece of the fabric from the wing of the Wright Flyer and some of the wood that Neil Armstrong took with him to the moon. Because the Wright brothers were from Ohio. Neil Armstrong grew up about 45 minutes from Dayton there, and he took that to the moon. And I saw that, and I said, wow. My first flight was during the 25th anniversary of Apollo 11. And I had a little lucite paperweight that had pieces of the heat shield from Apollo 11. And I took that on my flight with me, because that meant a lot to me. And then I saw, well, Neil Armstrong had done the same thing with his heroes. The Wright brothers were, you know, the early heroes, you know, for the John Glenns and the Neil Armstrongs, and those guys were the heroes for the shuttle generation. So I don't think John Glenn took anything from Don Thomas up there with him.
Don, thank you so much. We've got, of course, a gift bag for you there. You're a cut above on a board here, okay, that Ellen Runyon made over there for her.
Thank you. That's
up there.
Special.
And I hope you still like the astronaut bait that I put out for you there. Is that good on your flight home there?
It was.
And a special guest up here. Would you come up here? We have with us here Mayor Andrew Connor of Titusville. give him a hand as he comes up here with his son to meet an astronaut. And I'll have you just say a few words. Mayor Connor, thank you for showing up here. We've gotten to know him. He's the new mayor in town, and Gabriel and I have surrounded him about some of the things about our Space View Park and stuff. So welcome, and here's astronaut Don Thomas, young man.
Hey, great
flown
to
to
meet
space
you.
4 times. Just a comment or two there, Mayor.
Yeah. First of all, thank you guys so much for coming to Titusville and experiencing everything that we have here. Everything that Kennedy Space Center does, the history that we have is just second to none. And just putting Titusville back on the map, we're so excited about the revitalization of space here. And I'm kind of not a space nerd. I'm learning. But it's just so amazing to experience that with my kids as they grow up and learn about space. And ironically enough, he actually has a Mars project that we're working on currently, so this is perfect. We've been out in the lobby getting all the information on Mars, so just teaching the next generation the history, the science, is what we're all here for and what we're all about. So I'm very excited about what we can do together, partnership with the city and the American Space Museum, and just bringing space to life for not only the citizens of Titusville, but everybody that comes and visits. So thank you guys so much for being here. We appreciate every one of you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You can take pictures with Don later, not around here. He's going to stick around here, aren't you? Yep. And Chris Calle's on deck next. Does he know that? Yeah, go get Mr. Calle up here. And let's see, maybe, I'll tell you something we might have. Come over here, Nick. Maybe one of you, we're waiting on Chris. Maybe one of you got a question or two for Mr. Nick Thomas here. Chris is out there right there. Who's got a question for Nick here? It's been our experience. Yeah, Ellen.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I've been privileged to work at the Visitor Center now for 38 years. And when the time comes that I retire, I'm going to tell management I don't want to go watch. I want to get a ride on that suborbital flight of Blue Origins. Because I've seen the films, I've seen the videos, and it may be short, but by God, it's spectacular. Yeah, sure, he liked it.
As we're segueing out of here?
Yeah. You know, it's easy to duck that question, but the truth is that they are all unique. They talk about their families and they say, who's your favorite child? Well, you can't answer that. Everyone has their own unique gift and nature, style of presentation, and story to tell. So I can't narrow it down to one. I can't narrow it down to 100. They are all unique, and it's a privilege to be able to spend time with them and learn history from the people who made it. Yeah. Any other? Well, what's next on the agenda, Mark? Chris Calle.
Brief little show here, but brief to introduce him. We'll go to lunch and come back for
Mark Sieck is joining me.
Okay.
And so is Tom Music.
Oh, okay. Well, we got a couple of surprise guests here with Chris Calle. We got the Sieck brothers that are going to come up and join us for this presentation. Chris, of course, a scion of one of the great artists, space artists of our time, and an excellent, breathtaking artist in his own right. You've seen his work. It's just great. And we're going to talk now a little bit about shall we call it the art of spaceflight, Chris?
Well, we're going to call it the art of Hubble, but in putting this talk together, the art of Hubble really is all about the photography of Hubble, because the photography of Hubble really is beautiful artwork. So that's why the Sieck boys are going to join me, because it's truly, Hubble's images truly mixed art and photography.
Well, let's have at it.
We Great, thanks. Okay, so basically we were talking the art of Hubble, but in doing some research, the art of Hubble, there isn't much art except for some early conceptual slides that contractors put together, and this is one of those early renditions of what the Hubble Space Telescope would look like. Did I push that?
go to the next one. Where do I have to? Hey, Mike, clicker's not
Button
working.
not working here? There you
Oh.
go. The center one.
Larry McGlynn, any more outbursts, and you will be escorted from the room. So early concept images of the Space Telescope. Here's a really interesting kind of cutaway. And here's a beautiful painting. I don't know who it's attributed to. It might be from the NASA Fine Art Program, but I couldn't find reference on conceptual image. So this is Edwin Hubble. There were many stamps produced for the Hubble Space Telescope. I'm a stamp designer, so I kind of gravitated to a lot of these early stamps. And with the Hubble Space Telescope, I think outside the science and astronomy community, nobody really knew exactly what was going to be, what images were going to come out of this. And so early stamps showed just Hubble and the telescope. This was the U.S. issued this one for astronomer Edwin Hubble. But outside of the space and science community, I think nobody knew these amazing pictures were going to come out and to what extent they were. But they really, I think personally, the Hubble images kind of opened the universe to the common people who didn't really know what was out there, and these breathtaking images came out. But the problem, as probably everyone in this room knows, is that the early images, there was a problem with the mirror on the telescope, and the early images looked blurry. Probably to the common eye, it was still an amazing image. But when the Hubble was serviced and the new images came out, you could see the huge difference between the early versions and then a later one. And now even some of the same images that Hubble took, we see with the Webb telescope, are even more amazing, more clarity, more beautiful color. So I thought this was just an interesting comparison between the before and the after servicing. But again, for me, for a lot of people, I think when these postage stamps came out, the USPS produced, that was the time that people really stood back and couldn't believe that the imagery back. It was just these images of, it's almost like science fiction images. And my favorite part about these was, and I wrote this down, remember that scene in Forrest Gump where Bubba is talking about the different kinds of shrimp, fried shrimp, boiled shrimp, right, baked shrimp. It was the same thing for me when I saw the names of all these nebula, all the names of the photographs: the Crab Nebula, the Orion Nebula, Horsehead Nebula, Bubble Nebula, Butterfly Nebula, Lagoon Nebula, Carina Nebula. These were images and these were names that people had not seen before, and the images just I think spoke to everybody. And I think the UCX, tell us what you felt when you saw these amazing images that started to put together, like this magic mountain.
Well, I think everybody knew they were going to be getting stuff back that was going to be out. But they had artist concepts, drawings from movies from the past, Star Trek episodes. They knew that there was lots of colors and shapes and all that. The beauty with Hubble was it's optical. Telescopes that are up there now are X-ray or infrared or this, that, and the other. So those are semi-cheated, I guess we were talking about, colors added, things like that. This was pure optical. And when they came back after they put those corrective optics in, it opened up a whole new ball game.
Night and day.
Yeah. So, neat. I like it.
Tom, what was your first feeling when you saw those?
Well, I was amazed when I saw the ones like this, but I spoke with my wife last night after Chris asked us to be up here, and my wife was a elementary school 5th grade teacher for 40 years, and she remembers when Hubble was launched and when they started releasing and making these amazing photographs available. The increase, almost exponentially of the kids taking an interest in astronomy and space, and they come in, they bring books in and show her, and my wife is sort of a space buff too, so she always did teach, the space program. She had pictures of ours all through her classroom, and but she said really, when Hubble photos became widely distributed, and that she saw a great increase in the interest of the school kids in space and especially astronomy.
And I'm sure also, like for the art classes in schools, these kids were seeing these images. So it was that confluence of art, photography, but this really isn't photography, in my opinion. I mean, I couldn't paint anything, more beautiful than that. This is like science fiction art and photography. I think probably the art students too. I'm sure every art student, when these images came through and they were in Scholastic magazine, the teachers would show those, and the art students would be painting those as well because it was so fantastical. Like I said, like science fiction, like Star Wars, Star Trek. It was kind of bringing fantasy into reality. I don't know what the people in the science community expected to see. Maybe they expected to see very similar images, but you said it earlier, Mark, about telescopes.
The ground-based telescopes, that's all they had to go by. I mean, they could look back, they could see. I mean, they used those ground-based telescopes to figure out where they wanted to start aiming the Hubble once it became operational. So they knew that there was shapes and colors out there. They just didn't realize how much detail they could see once they got the right optics in. That's a game changer.
I wonder what happened, like in the science community, when those blurry images came back. Even as interesting as those were, I'm sure a lot of people who knew that they shouldn't be that way.
Irish pubs did good business that week, I'm sure.
I'm sure. One last slide. We could have put 100 slides of all these nebulas and galaxies, but I think you've probably seen almost all of them. The one last one, and Larry, you'll enjoy this one. It's a painting I did for the event. But when I was thinking about putting this together, I realized that this painting sort of combines exactly what we're talking about. It combines, an artist using photography from the Hubble to put together artwork, but it kind of mixes art and photography and creating a different type of piece of artwork. So I just think artists can be inspired by these images. I just wonder, some of these Hubble and even Webb images, how much better can you do of these? If I'm not a big proponent of like an artist taking a photograph and then repainting it so it looks like the photograph. You have to take a piece of yourself and create something new and unique. But I just personally don't know how you can paint better than here. I'll go back to how can you do a painting better than reality? Sometimes you want to elevate something that you've seen and make it your own. But these images that came back, I think are just stellar. I mean, they're just unbelievable.
Good. Way good. Launch pictures came out good. That's all that mattered to us.
What's at the launch? Yeah. They were saying that their launch pictures of the space shuttles going up to service the telescope came out beautiful. Should have put some of those up in here. This was going to be just a short little talk. Any questions? Happy to. Yes.
You go back to that picture, there's 4-point cross. Do you know what causes that?
The same. I don't, but somebody here might.
Whenever if you can go back to blow that one up. No, that one up. I don't know. Make it bigger. So, I mean, optical engineers here will probably beat me out on this, but whenever you can distinguish if it's Webb or Hubble, because Hubble will always have a 4 spire diffraction pattern. That just comes from the interference of the light as it enters the telescope. But Webb will always have 6, right? So if you're ever looking at 2 images and you want to figure out which one's which, that's how you can do that. It's just optical interference from the diffraction.
Can we find the answers or what?
Well, we're asking the community, and that's the beauty of ShuttleFest.
Another question. Let's have a hand. Right there.
How do you see these kind of images influencing the photography industry in the future?
Better cameras, better optical. I mean, I can remember, just from photography that we use, first digital cameras were 1, 2 megapixels. Now they're putting 50, 60, 80 megapixel sensors in bodies this size. I mean, that was unheard of 3 years ago. And sky's the limit. Now, I don't know. I'm not involved in any of the manufacturing. And the image quality keeps getting better, and the price goes down the more they make, as anything with chips. So it'll be interesting to see, that's for sure.
But what about, I'm curious if your question also had to do with, like, what about amateur photographers photographing stars?
I haven't done any. To tell you the truth, I never really got involved in astrophotography. There's plenty of books and YouTube how-to videos and things out there. You need a good scope. I mean, you can't just I can put a 500, 600 millimeter lens shoot, but it doesn't look as good. Hook it up to a regular telescope.
I think, to answer your question, I think it inspire people to try to photograph more and more. Yes, sir.
I'm one of the vice presidents of the Astronomical Society of Glasgow in Scotland, and we have an imaging group where these guys are doing the photography, and the pictures that we get now. When I got interested in space in the 60s and early 70s, it was only massive observatories could come anywhere near that now, so the technology is really advancing now, and amateurs can get pictures of the pillars of creation, and they even use, they've even got a Hubble palette. They use software. There's a thing called the Hubble palette that they use to make the pictures.
So more every year something is going to come out bigger and better and more clarity.
Let's go ahead and take one more question. If you have it, feel free to raise your hand, and we'll get to you right over here.
Yeah, a few years ago, before COVID and everything, and there was a picture of the International Space Station with the solar panels and everything that was taken by a person in Germany, the right light. That's about 250 miles away or something. And is that possible from ground? I mean, he just so happened to be at the right place at the right time.
There's programs that you can get, apps on your phone that'll tell you, you plug in your zip code and it'll tell you. But you have to have, that was probably through a telescope that was probably about this big, that far around. And you hook the camera up to it, and the thing goes, telescope's programmable, punch the thing in, and the telescope will swing to that spot. And then that thing's moving. Like when they pass in front of the sun or the moon, it's a second. Camera.
And then out of that video, they can capture a single image.
Still, yeah.
We want to thank our panel for an excellent presentation. We have now the ritualistic presentation of the bags. We're going.
Our co-chair with Connie McDaniel for this. Chris really helped me a lot. But it's Mark's baby, definitely Mark's
baby.
Outstanding. We're going to take a break at this time from now until 1:30, and at which time we'll be back with the panel of the astronaut, the launch director, and the writer. So get yourself something to eat, and we'll see you back here shortly.
Oceans guy on Apollo, only 92 years old, all right, with his daughter Karen, so we appreciate you all here. We're going to have our fabulous panel here, and Eileen's got a little bit of voice soothingness to have on there. She's willing to talk, but you all have had so much one-on-one with her, I think. This is the intimacy we want for ShuttleFest, that we're just not ushering in the panel and then they usher out the back door. Thank you for all the quality time, Eileen, that you've spent with everybody. Give her a hand now for that so we don't later in there. And we might not go the full 90 minutes, but we'll take questions, and we're also going to do the silent auction. Marty Winkle will give away the silent auction bidding winners. And then we have a bunch of door prizes, most of them $50 to even more than $100. So your door prize number is the back of your VAB ticket number, okay? And you must be present to win. We didn't give them to the presenters, all right? We'll be able to fix that. But anyway, we're honoring the workers here, and we love everybody being here. So you can contact the museum or me with any lessons learned or things that you liked or would like to see at future ShuttleFest. So. Without further ado, let me turn it over to Nick Thomas. Again, give Nick a big hand for the wonderful job he's done. Thank you.
Well, welcome to this concluding panel for ShuttleFest 5, which has been a great success, I think. And very quickly, let's have a round of applause for Marquette and his team. Outstanding, guys. Good show. This final panel is entitled The Astronaut, the Launch Director, and the Writer. Jonathan Ward, along with being a well-known author, is a resident astronomer at Atlas Ocean Voyages, Viking Ocean Cruises, and Silver Sea. He is a fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society and a NASA Solar System ambassador. He was also the creative consultant for the film Spacewoman, a documentary about Colonel Collins. He co-authored with Colonel Collins Through the Glass Ceiling to the Stars, the story of the first American woman to command a space shuttle mission. And with Mike Leinebach, he was co-author on Bringing Columbia Home, the untold story of a lost space shuttle and her crew. So let's say hello to Jonathan Ward. In 1984, Mike Leinebach served as a structural engineer, and in 1988, he became the deputy director for space station hardware integration. In 2000, he became a launch director for the Space Shuttle program, and personally, I do remember I remember him for his rallying of the troops on the TCDT for STS-125. We were looking at some dark days and an unknown future, and Mike rallied the team and said, we're going to make this last one the best one, and I'll always remember that. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mike Leinebach. Eileen Collins was one of 4 women selected for undergraduate pilot training at Vance Air Force Base. She became an instructor pilot on the T-38 before transitioning to the C-141 Starlifter. During the Grenada operation, she ferried troops from the 82nd Airborne to Grenada, and she also brought back home 36 medical students who had been stranded on that island. She went on to be selected she was the second woman pilot to attend test pilot school, graduating with Class 89 Bravo, and in 1990, she was selected by NASA as an astronaut with Group 13. She flew as a pilot for STS-63 and 84, and as the commander of STS-93 and 114. Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Eileen Collins. We have a presentation, and Jonathan, would you like to lead us off on that?
Sure. I can't tell you what it feels like to be up here with two legends. It is quite an overwhelming experience, and to see so many of you out here today, it's been wonderful. I've gotten to know so many of you over the course of the last decade or so at various space fests and Astronaut Scholarship Foundation, things like that. It's wonderful to have you all here. The reason I guess I'm kind of here as the glue that's holding some of this history together. But we wanted to talk a little bit about what it was like for these two legends to be able to share their story. I was the one who was fortunate to be able to help them both bring their stories to life. And I wanted to give you kind of a little bit of, one of the questions we get a lot is, what was it actually like to write a book and to tell your story? And I wanted to give you a little idea about how some of these things actually evolve and let you peek behind the scenes here. And then we'll also, of course, have Mike and Eileen tell their stories. We're going to start off with Mike and me, and very briefly, this was at Cracker Jack's, which is now called Pier
220.
Pier 220,
Titusville.
under the Max Brewer Bridge, right? I had written 2 books about Apollo and had been staying with the NASA test conductor Norm Carlson at his house, and he passed away before those books came out. But Norm always told me that Mike Leinebach was the best person he ever hired for NASA. I never got a chance to meet Mike while Norm was alive, and then at Norm's funeral, I met Mike. I recognized him from across the room. I said, why don't we go out and have a couple of beers and tell Norm stories? And so we ended up at Cracker Jack's this day, and it's interesting, we can actually point to the exact date and time on this picture, 12:42 p.m. I got my picture taken with Mike, and a minute after that, Mike said, I always wanted to write a book about Columbia, but like I never had the discipline or something like that.
Yeah. I'd started it. Yeah. Okay. Y'all hear me? There it is. I'd started a few years before, and I just couldn't finish it. It was too early, too soon after the accident. So by the time Jonathan and I met in 15, it was time to tell the story.
Yeah, and it was just one of those things that I was completely out of the blue that when Mike said I wanted to tell the story, and I said, let's just talk about that. And we got together again a couple of weeks later. Mike and I discussed the scope of the book. I came back with an idea, a proposal, which Mike said, well, if that's the story you want to tell, maybe I'll talk to somebody else. And I thought, oh, I should listen to what Mike's saying here. Because Mike very definitely did not want to focus on what was going on inside the space shuttle during the accident. He wanted to focus on his team that had gone to East Texas to help recover Columbia and then to come back and reconstruct it. And so, listen to what, if you ever get a chance to work with somebody on a book, listen to what they wanted to say in their story. You can help influence things later on, but make sure you're telling the story they want to tell. And so this is, Mike, as soon as we agreed on things, Mike started the ball rolling. I got a call literally the day after Mike said, we're go. I got a call the next day from Sean O'Keefe, the former administrator of NASA, scheduled for a 15-minute phone call that went for 2 hours. And so Mike started pulling together his team. A little bit about this one here.
Yeah, this is up at our house in Scottsmore. And those are the first few people we got together. There's Ed Mango on the left. He was assistant launch director on the day of Columbia. Back behind, and Ann Miklas next to Ed. She was a structural engineer who worked tile systems, thermal protection systems. Behind Ann is Jimmy Comer. Comer was the USA ops lead for all processing in the VAB and out at the launch pad. In the middle, Larry Osterly. Most of you know Larry. He was, at that time, I guess he was the chief. Larry, are you in here? I think he was the chief of the OTC office at the time. Maybe not. Maybe this was after that. That's how we met. He was the chief of the OTC office when I was working in the MTD office. Jack Keifenheim, we wanted a payload representative on the team in case we got into discussions about what happened to the Space Hab or some of the late payloads that we stowed. And then there's me with my full beard under the flag.
We spent the full day out at Mike's place just kind of talking about the accident, and it was just a wide-ranging discussion that went a lot of interesting ways. As we proceeded to have the interviews about what was going on, we talked to more and more folks. They would recommend people to talk to. Mike would connect me with other people. And we started hearing more and more that the real story was in East Texas, and that we really needed to go out and talk to people who had been on the ground out there. And so with Mike's concurrence, and then with the concurrence of the people who run the Columbia Museum in Hemp Hill, Texas, I went out there in October of 2015 and spent a completely mind-blowing several days there, getting to meet a lot of people who had been personally involved at what was effectively ground zero for the accident. The sheriff here, Tom Maddox, and the gentleman from the Forest Service who'd been involved in the very first reports of debris coming down, Belinda Gay and Marcia Cooper there with me in the center there. They run the museum. They were both, Belinda was in charge of the feeding operation at the VFW Hall, which ended up serving something like 40,000 meals completely free to the people who were involved there, entirely volunteer donated. Greg Kors up there, who became, as a fast friend of ours, still we talk to him almost every other week. And little Granny Nelson here, just one of the people who helped out of the goodness of her heart. But it was just an amazing story. When we talked to these folks, we realized we needed to expand the scope of the book and include what was going on the ground there, because they were so integral to what happened with Columbia. And so it took, that was 2015, and so 2 years later, we finished the book in February of 2017, and then it took the better part. Well, actually, one of the other changes that we made, it was interesting. We wrote it all entirely in third person, and Mike had his brother-in-law, who was an English teacher, read the book. What did he tell you? What did he recommend?
Well, Scott was a Fairfax County, Virginia High School Teacher of the Year twice. So he figured Scott knows what he's talking about, and he suggested that we turn the book into first person with me as first person rather than third person. And I'll be honest with you folks, I hated that idea. I didn't like the idea of being anything about me, but he sold me on the concept that it would work better as a book if it had a first person tell the story. So I sucked in and did that.
Yeah. And it turned out to be, of course, it made it a much more personal story. But this is unboxing day, so this is the day that the books arrive from the publishers at Mike's house, and Mike is now getting to see his story. I'm choking up all of a sudden here. Tell me what it was like to pull that book out of the box.
That was a good day. I mean, I don't even read books. And now all of a sudden I wrote a book, and now geez, how did this happen? And it actually showed up, and that's me flipping through the book, and just we'd seen the drafts of it, of course, but then to see it in print and boxes like that, it was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was a wonderful process to be able to work with Mike. We were very collaborative with each other. We'd send drafts back and forth and talk by phone. We met together a lot in person. I made a lot of trips down to Florida to talk to Mike and review things, but it was such an honor to get to see this book come out. You can see the number of copies that he got there. I think we had something like 300 copies that we got. We had gotten pre-orders, and we then went to St. Augustine. Mike brought him up in his RV, and we had a big signing party outside of his RV and signed several hundred copies of the book to get out to people before Christmas time that year. And we had timed the book to come out on the 15th anniversary, or the 15 years since the accident. We had told the publisher that was the date we were driving towards. And so we were aiming for February 1st, 2018. We started the book tour. At that point, we did a NASA Lessons Learned program at Kennedy earlier in the week. We went to Johnson Space Center, where we met up here with Evelyn Husband Thompson. She was the widow of Columbia's commander. And we had deliberately not spoken to the astronauts' families as part of this. I think you may have talked to them behind the scenes, didn't you?
Well, I sure did, and
Yeah.
got their permissions on a lot of content. I assured them that we wouldn't get into anything that would hurt them, and they trusted me, and so. But no, we very much talked to the crew families. And then the biggest compliment I think we got on the book was from Evelyn that day when she thanked us for writing the book, and that meant a lot to both.
She asked us to sign copies for her and her kids, which was very, very touching. So, and then Mike finally got to meet little Granny Nelson there at Hemp Hill, on the anniversary of the accident. And we've gone back a couple of times since that to help commemorate Columbia on the.
Yeah, they have get-togethers every year out there in Hemp Hill, but then every 5 years, from 2003 on, every 5 years it's a pretty big celebration. So last 2023 we went out there for the 20th. That was a good time. A lot of people showed up from the original days and renewed a lot of friendships and had a lot of hugs and a few tears here and there, but it was good to go back out.
And it's been very touching to see the response we've had from across the country. Mike and I do a lot of presentations to all kinds of groups, from first responder groups to crisis management teams and things like that, as well as civil aviation patrol groups and things like that. So the book still very much continues to have legs, which we're very grateful for. We were going to have a movie made of it, and unfortunately the company that was going to make the movie went under. So it's back in play. If anybody's got a couple $1 million that they want to throw at making the Columbia story, let us know. Okay.
Or just even a good contact in Hollywood would help.
Yeah. Well, part of the we had Bob Crippen, who was the first commander or the first pilot of Columbia, write the prologue to the book, or the intro to the book, and then we said that the fitting person to write the epilogue would be the commander of the return to flight mission, who happened to be Eileen Collins. And I had met Eileen at some autograph shows before, but I was just one of people who was getting her to sign things. But this was Mike and me from at the same place, Cracker Jacks. It took us almost 3 years to get from conception to getting the book signed, or getting the book out. So it's interesting going back through email here, and I found the email where Mike introduced me to Eileen on July 25th, 2015, saying that I was going to get in touch with her to write the epilogue to bring in Columbia home. And Eileen, you, what was that like for you to write the epilogue to the book?
Well, I immediately said yes, without a doubt. I immediately said yes. There are so many lessons to be learned from the accidents. It must be documented. And I went in, it was an honor. And by the way, I'm sorry I lost my voice. I'll try my best here.
Okay. Well, yeah. Well, you can. All right. Well, we'll move on here. But anyway, after the book came out, I would see Eileen at a few astronaut events, like the Astronaut Memorial Foundation, the annual Day of Remembrance, and I would. Here we were going to. This was at Spacefest a year after after we had agreed to work on the epilogue. I ran into Eileen out there, so this was the first time we'd met in person after she agreed to work on the epilogue. But I had always been on her. When I found out she didn't have her own memoirs written, I said, somebody needs to tell her story. She's got such an important story as the first woman commander of a space mission, that she really needed to have that story told. Whether it was me, I thought she should have a woman writer work with her on that. And Eileen always said, well, I like the quote she said to me. It was like, every astronaut biography starts off with, I was a child prodigy and then I got better. And she said that's not my story. And she was always too busy. You were on something like 4 or 5 corporate boards and National Space Society and everything. And then COVID hit. And she and I had both come off of cruises and then suddenly saw that we had nothing going on for the rest of the year. And Eileen, I got in touch with her. I went back through my emails and realized I was borderline pestering her to consider using COVID time to write her book. And then finally we agreed on Cinco de Mayo to start working on her book. So here's where she finally decided to work with me on this. And I like to say that Isaac Newton invented calculus during the plague, and we wrote Eileen's memoirs during COVID. So that's.
No, I will say that my husband kept telling me to write a book those years. Like, no, I don't want to talk about me. I don't want to do that. I don't want to live in the past. I need to always live in the present, think about the future. Well, my husband doesn't know how to write, and he was going to write my book. And I Oh, we got somebody. But I eventually said yes. Obviously, I had the time because of the pandemic, but it was for young people. Mostly, I wanted them to think about joining the military, think about math, science, technology, engineering, think about being an astronaut, working in the space program, and be a reader, because I got interested in being an astronaut from reading books like, well, being a pilot from reading books like that, Against the Wall over there. So I thought, Eileen, you're getting old. Write your book.
And I think that's part of the stories that we hear. There's a lot of people around here who have some fascinating things to remember. You've all been involved in amazing parts of American history by working on the space program. And I can't tell you how many people I've encountered that said, my uncle or my grandfather worked on Apollo, but I have no idea what they did. Don't let that happen to you. Don't let your kids or your grandkids not know about the contributions you made to the space program if you were involved in that.
And one other thing, the difference in our book, I thought it was important to talk about mistakes that I made and what I learned from them. I made a lot of mistakes, and they came out in the book. And I didn't want to write I Love Me, as Jonathan said. I didn't want to write a book like that. Look at all the things I did. Look how great I am. No, I wanted to write. We made mistakes. I made mistakes. I personally made a bad choice or something like that, and what I learned from it. So it's kind of a helpful leadership book, too.
So Eileen and I, we never met in person while we were working on this book together. We had to do it entirely by Zoom. So these are candid photos. She didn't know I was doing screenshots of her as we were. So you in your living room and me out in my work shed. But yeah, we would have a bi-weekly phone call, talk about what was coming up and. Eileen did a lot of the writing herself. She would send me, 5-page long manuscripts of things that were going on. Well, it was really important. I mean, she not only telling her story, but she was recognizing there were at that point not very many books out about the space shuttle program, and so this was an important part of history that Eileen wanted to make sure got preserved. And so her task to me was to focus on the missions, the space shuttle missions, and make sure I got as much accurate information about that as possible. Obviously, she's the only one who knows about her, who could tell the story about her Air Force career and her early upbringing. But again, the idea was to try to make it both a personal story and an important documentation of history. And we were hoping we'd be able to get to Johnson Space Center and access the center was completely shut down the entire time we were working on the book, so we had to rely on what we could get online or going through Eileen's flight logs and things like that. We finally got a chance to meet up together in person. This was after the manuscript had been submitted. We finally got ended up going through the same publisher that Mike and I had used for bringing Columbia home. We got the contract like in November of 2020, and they said, can you have the book ready by March? And we were maybe a third of the way through it, a quarter of the way through it at that point, and so we asked them to push it back. But if you've ever written a book before, this is another thing to think about. If you're ever thinking about wanting to do that, you've got to have the discipline to sit down and show up at the keyboard every day. I created a spreadsheet. I realized I had to have 100,000 words, and I'd only written 20,000. How many words do I have to write between now and the beginning of March? That has to be quality stuff like that. So I would make myself write 1,500 to 2,000 words a day, and you had to do it, had to keep track of it, and treat it just like any other kind of project you're involved in.
This is why you have a co-author, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
I wrote 3 or 4 words a day.
Yeah. But it's one of those things. It was like losing weight. I mean, I don't know how many. Some of you knew me from before. I've lost more than 140 pounds in the course of a year. But it's just like showing up every day and sticking to the diet every day. Once I get my mind focused like that, I can do it. But it's not easy. And anybody who's ever tried to write a book or has written one, I really applaud you because it is a tough thing to do. And then now this is Eileen's unboxing day. So this is about a year and a half after or less than a year and a half after we started the project. What did that feel like for you, Eileen, when you saw that?
Jonathan told me to take that picture. It was, don't forget to take a picture when you first see the book. And I also found it at Barnes & Noble in the new releases, took a picture.
Yeah.
But, I think it felt like a big weight off my shoulders, because all those years, for example, after each one of my missions, I'd be getting emails and phone calls from authors. Oh, all right, let's write a book together. And after I think it was my third mission, I must have had over 12 authors contacted me. Let's write a book. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to fly in space again. And I never wanted to. So, but all those years, I said, okay, we finally did it. But I wanted to make sure, the nice thing about working with Jonathan, he kept me on track, and things like I would go down a rabbit hole on, like, oh, this is some airplane accident, and I'd start writing about it, and I'd go, you remember that? I'd be going on, and he's like, Eileen, that doesn't belong in the book. We'll put that in the second book, doesn't belong in this book. So he kind of kept me on, like, let's stick to memoirs, that's what we're doing here. So, but it was, yeah, big weight off my shoulders.
It's an interesting process, too, when you're trying to write something in somebody else's voice. We wanted to make it obviously sound like Eileen, and Eileen did. I mean, I think every word that's in the book came out of Eileen. It was just a question of putting them in the right order. But we would have some interesting things. I would do the artistic license thing where I would change something that she wrote, and she wouldn't say anything about it. That about 2 weeks later, she'd say, I noticed you changed this word that I used in the sentence, and I chose that word very deliberately. And I remember when we spent an entire afternoon talking about one sentence one time, where you would come up with a couple of words. I said, I know exactly what you're trying to say, but that's not the way people talk. And so what are ways that we can rephrase that in a way that sounds more conversational, but gets across exactly what you were trying to say? It was.
And I think another good thing is you have an editor, and our editor was Skyhorse. Did he change anything? I don't think he changed anything.
I think they suggested taking a few things out, and that was about it.
Yeah, we had to edit it down to 90,000 words, but we did have to I wrote a whole thing on how to handle mistakes. I have a 4-step process for dealing with mistakes. That came out, actually it ended up one sentence. How to deal with conflict, how to deal with making decisions. Conflict is a big thing, especially after the accident. There was a lot of conflict. People yelling at each other, bad stuff, and I didn't put that in the book, but just the fact that when that happens, what do? How can you be part of toning things down? And a lot of it, I had to be sensitive to other people's things that happened to them. Like, I don't want them to read my book. Oh my God, she wrote about me. I didn't give her my permission for that. So I had to be careful about that. So that was a lot of things that were going through my head in writing the book. But Jonathan did say, Eileen, we have enough material for a second book. Let's wait like 5 years and think about it.
Yeah, who would like to buy a second book from Eileen? Okay, well, there we go. There's book 2. Okay, and we've heard more stories from Columbia that need to come out too. But all right, and then of course the great honor is to be able to sit down at the table with these two people and sign books. This was at Kennedy Space Center a couple of years ago. To be able to sit with both of these giants, to be able. Same jacket. All right, all right. So. And continuing, it's wonderful. Mike invites me to take part in events, come down to the Rocket Ranch reunion. Eileen invites me to go along on book tours and things like that. It's just it's a phenomenal experience to be able to feel like you're trusted to tell the story. So what a great feeling. All right. I thought one other thing we might do is talk a little bit about return to flight before we open it up to questions, if that's all right with everybody. Okay with that? Yeah, because this is where Eileen and Mike overlapped, and rather than talk about the Columbia accident, I thought maybe talk a little bit about what the two of them were doing leading up to the point that we returned to flight. And so Eileen was preparing to fly in March of 2003, the next mission. Originally, yeah. So this is in East Texas near Nacogdoches. Yeah.
So on the left is Soichi Noguchi, who was my MS-1. And next to him is that Jan?
Jan Amon from the Texas Forest Service.
Right, from the Texas Forest Service, myself, and then on the right is Jim Kelly, who's my pilot. And Jim Kelly was the CACO, which is a Casualty Assistance Officer for Laura Clark, who lost her life on Columbia. So the day of the accident, I called Jim Kelly. He's like, Eileen, I know. I'm on my way over to Laurel's house right now. And, you know, I didn't see him for 3 months because he was helping John Clark and their son, Ian. And then I finally got Jim back to the crew, and we slowly worked our way back into training because there was the accident period, which Jonathan's going to talk a little bit more about what was going on up there in East Texas, Hemp Hill. So our crew tried to help out up there as much as we could and get through the accident investigation and then return to flight. And it wasn't just a red line, it meshed. So the return to flight started while the accident investigation was still going on. So we were supporting both of those efforts. Oh, and I wanted to say one other interesting thing about this picture. I knew what was going on up there in East Texas, but I hadn't been there. NASA headquarters told me, you need to train for your mission. And I said very respectfully, my mission's not going to fly in April. They told me, you're going to fly April 6th. I said, no, we're not. We're not going to fly April 6th. They're like, you need to go train for your mission. So I was under orders to train for the mission. I knew it wasn't going to happen. So I tried. Working with my train was just me and Soichi. The rest of my crew was gone. 3 of my crew members went over to Russia to launch on the Soyuz the day of the accident. They packed and left the day of the accident. The 2 Russians and Ed Lu, the American long-duration crew member. So I said, we need to put a plan together. And I decided to go talk to people. Me and Soichi were the only ones left. Talked to people everywhere. Took my crew, Florida, took them, you know, everything down here. Took them to California, main engines. Went to Michoud, where they needed to talk to people, went there. Obviously, the tank was accused of the foam falling off. So we did all that. I put a plan together. Part of it was to go up to East Texas. And so I got message back, we don't want you up there. The astronaut's going to get in the way. We're busy. And I said, well, I'm volunteering to help do the search. They didn't want us up there. So I worked it, so we went anyway. And they yelled at us, shoes, clothes, the whole bit. So we did the search. And I think it was the right thing to do because then they liked us. And Soichi found a piece of tile. And, you know, I'll tell you, I'm glad I did because now I can feel what they were going through. And I went up there 3 times. The last time was they had a big banquet, and everybody was happy. And I was surprised. Everybody was happy. But they had already processed the whole thing, and they had recovered 41% of Columbia, is what they told me. They might have recovered more, but at that time they recovered 41%, and they were very happy about that. And so it takes a long time to process that and get through it, but I think it was important for us as astronauts not only be part of that mission. Several astronauts, by the way, were up there working every day full time. But I thought it was important for us to be part of that, especially we were connecting the past to the future. And I'm really glad I decided to fight that battle to get up there, and I wasn't training. We really didn't start training till September. Okay.
All right. Good. So while that was going on, Mike, what was going on back in Florida?
Well, we were receiving the debris from Texas. It would arrive on flatbed trucks packed in containers. We got in 2 trucks twice a week at the beginning, so quite a bit of debris started coming in, and we had a triage system set up where we would take whatever type of debris it was and separate it out and get it in its first place inside the reconstruction hangar. That's the hangar, that's the reusable launch vehicle hangar right next to the shuttle landing facility that Spaceport Florida owns, and they lent it to us to do the reconstruction. We had the National Transportation Safety Board with us on the team, and they helped us lay out the grid on the floor of the hangar to start laying out the debris and trying to make sense out of it. And that took 3 months. We were recovering debris out in Texas for 3 months. And as those 3 months progressed, you know, the debris coming back got less and less, and we finally called an end to it in early May. And then we had all that we thought we were going to get, and you know, we picked up a few pieces after that, but by and large, the recovery itself was done in early May, so 3 months. And the team working in the hangar was really special. I mean, these are people that wanted to work on Columbia. They, by and large, they had worked on Columbia their careers, so they knew the vehicle intimately. They loved the vehicle. There were times where the emotions got too raw to continue, and we called a timeout. We did things like take the whole reconstruction team to a ball game. Some of this is in the book, so y'all bear with me, but we took people to a ball game, a minor league ball game out here in Vieira, just to blow off some steam and party with each other and put the ugliness of the hangar behind us for a few hours. And we did several things like that. And so we really meshed very well together as a team. We laid out on the floor of the hangar the important pieces of the belly of the orbiter and the wings. A lot of the other stuff we put in boxes along the side of the hangar that weren't directly related to the accident. And so we just progressed on, and those first 3 months was very difficult, but we got through it. And I remember thinking about, similar to Eileen in training for the flight, I got to thinking at about month 2, something like that, when are we going to get back into launch processing? You know, there was worry among the team that the program might have been canceled after the Columbia accident. After all, we then had lost Challenger and Columbia and 14 astronauts. But it had a little bit of an intel, and so we realized we were probably going to survive and fly out the program to complete the International Space Station. And that raised the question in my mind, how are we going to get back into training, launch team training? And so 4 months after the accident, I called the first launch team training session in the launch control room. There it is. Well, that's after a launch. So 4 months after the accident, we got back into training because I didn't want the launch team to lose their edge. It was a tough day. That first day was a tough day, and so we took it slow, but nevertheless, we were all together as a team. Had the Johnson Space Center, the flight control team with us, as we always do in those big integrated sims. And so we acted like we were launching the shuttle again 4 months after the accident. And we continued that. We did simulations every couple of months for the next couple of years. And then we really started getting serious about it about a year away from flight. So I just didn't want the team to lose their edge, and also wanted them to realize we're going to fly again. You know, this is not the end. So, you know, get your head back in the game, grieve when you need to and when you want to, that's fine. Take time out, go home early, whatever. But we are going to fly again, and so let's start thinking that way.
Just an amazing, one of the things that I really appreciated about working with both of these incredible leaders was hearing about their leadership under adverse conditions like this. So many lessons that can be learned in corporate America and other places like that too. How do you deal with adversity, deep tragedy? How do you keep a team motivated when everything seems bleak around you? Just fantastic lessons learned from both of them, and highly respected. I hope that the leaders everywhere will get something out of reading both books just because of those kinds of lessons learned. And I have tremendous admiration for Mike and Eileen as leaders. Yeah, here's return to flight. Okay, so it took better part of more than a year and a half to prepare the hardware, make the changes. Of course, it was a piece of foam from the external tank the doomed Columbia. So this is the new and improved external tank for STS-114 with Mike and Eileen looking at it being stacked.
It was a little better. It was a little better, Eileen.
It was a little, how many tanks did we have? Right, they changed it. I don't know if you want me to get into this now. We actually changed our tank at least once. But I will tell a little story here. So the foam that brought Columbia down came off of bipod.
Yes.
I think it was the bipod region. So my crew made several trips to Michoud, where the tank is made. We're climbing around these tanks. They're in the horizontal, and they got platforms, so we're walking around. We met the guy that sprayed Columbia. And I remember, I didn't know at the time it was him, but one of my flight engineer, Steve Robinson, told me afterwards, he goes, yeah, the guy we were talking to, he sprayed Columbia. And because that geometric areas had to be manually sprayed. I would say the open areas are sprayed automatically. And I remember Steve saying to him, it wasn't your fault. It was the procedures. And he goes, well, we've been through all that. He had already been through all that. It was the way the procedures had them spray the foam on, but people, some people are like, did I cause the accident? And that goes through every pilot's mind. Somebody in your squadron goes down. You're like, it's something I could have done. And so anyway, we're crawling on the tank, and I go, what is that area right there? Oh, that's the PAL ramp, P-A-L, protuberance air loads. I go, oh, what are we doing with that? Because it's a long metal area that runs from top to bottom on the tank. It's about that wide, and I don't know, it's very long, length of the tank. And the technician, I should say, so he goes, oh, that needs to be there because on the other side of it is a high-pressure hydrogen line, and your hydrogen fuel goes down that line. Or no, it was the relief line. But anyway, it doesn't matter. It's high-pressure hydrogen. You need that PAL ramp. It's just a piece of metal because when the airflow comes around, it protects that high-pressure hydrogen line. And if you don't have the PAL ramp, that line is going to start vibrating, and it could break, and you are kaboom. I go, oh, okay, that's all I need to know. Well, keep the PAL ramp. Well, guess what? When we launched, a piece of foam about 2 feet long, just under 2 pounds, fell off the PAL ramp. Manually sprayed area, and we saw it on the video. And before we went to bed on flight day 1, our flight director sent us a video, and I went, oh no, I remember the PAL ramp. I was okay with that, and I was wrong. So that was a mistake I made. And I remember Butch Wilmore saying I was okay with the Starliner. I didn't ask some questions, or maybe I didn't. I was okay with it. So the astronauts were not just victims. Sometimes you don't know, but sometimes you do. And I knew about that PAL ramp, and it went through the program. And I read the briefing, and I was shocked that foam fell off of it. Anyway, so after our mission flew, by the way, the foam, as you know, it didn't hit us. It went under the wing, but it could have hit us. We got lucky. It didn't hit us. If it did, we had Atlantis out there that would have brought us home, rescued us. Would have been a rescue mission. And we were ready for that. We called, there was a name for the program. The rescue program was Launch on Need, LON, the Launch on Need program, which took a lot of work, because they had to have all that. Every flight and Mike, I'm sure you remember, he had to have that backup shuttle ready to go. We didn't need it, fortunately, because we did a survey, and we had cameras. We did flip around, RPM maneuvered, no damage. I was not worried at all coming home, but the shuttle was grounded for a year, and over that year, they took the PAL ramp off. So I was kind of paying attention to that, and the shuttle program spent the money to do the analysis to say, oh, we never needed the PAL ramp. Just kidding. When that airflow comes around the tank, it's not going to make that high-pressure line go kaboom. And it didn't. And the rest of after my flight, the flight that went up the following summer, because it took a year, 12 months to get the shuttle flying again. I don't know how many, there might have been 15, 20 more flights after mine. They all flew without the PAL ramp. So, it's just one of the lessons learned I talked about in the book. Jonathan and I talked about, and by the way, Jonathan researched everything I said. He did a lot of research on the book. Everything in our book is true. And that isn't always true for every other book that you read, but our book is true. I did not want stories in there that were not true because I wanted to be history, really including the mistakes that were made. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah, well, it's, I mean, interesting. One of the things that Eileen's talking about her pilot training days. She got offered the chance to fly an F-15, and she thought at the time she might have been the first woman to fly an F-15.
I was told.
You were told she was the first woman who'd gotten to fly an F-15, and we found out after the book came out that there had been a woman before that, and so the second edition of the book, we corrected that. She did not want that to go forward.
Right.
Yeah. All right. This is you and your crew again. The stand-down was an opportunity to check a number of things that had gone wrong. There was some issues with the separation motors on the solid rocket boosters, a number of things. It wasn't just the foam on the external tank that were fixed here, but this, again, led up to finally coming down to launch in July of 2015. I just wanted to show this very briefly, make sure the sound is on some, huh? 2005, excuse me, I'm sorry, 2005. Yeah, everything's got to be correct. Eileen corrected me, okay, so absolutely. No, that's I can't believe it's been 20 years ago. Anyway, so anyway, here, this is some high-definition video of the Discovery launch on 114, and you'll see some, number one, we heard about the Woodpecker this morning. You'll see a vulture get hit as by the external tank as Discovery lifts off, but you'll also see some Tyvek covers come off of the maneuvering thrusters, which I hear a lot of people gasp in shock when they see that, but they're just kind of paper covers coming off. Yeah. There was no music at the launch pad that day, so yeah.
Firing chain is armed.
Eileen was asking Mike, you weren't nervous at all, were you? Mike, what was it like to give the go for launch for that?
It was intense. I get asked that a lot. What is it like to launch the shuttle? And no, I was never particularly nervous, but it's a very intense feeling. I mean, you're concentrating as much as you can possibly concentrate. You're looking for things to go wrong so you can call a hold or have the ground launch sequencer automatically hold the vehicle. So there's an intensity to it, yes, but nervousness, no, I wouldn't say nervousness.
Crew, from the crew, we're just focused, and we've got to be ready for a scrub. So as the countdown happens, you got to think we're going to go, we're going to scrub. And I had a scrub on my previous mission. It was right before the engine started. And fortunately, this one, it was our second launch attempt. We tried to launch 2 weeks previous. Our low-level sensors in that orange tank, they're called low-level sensors because if you run out of gas and those 4 sensors show you're out of gas, they shut the main engines down. If the engines suck air into them, they're gonna boom. Because they have to have pressure on them. Well, my previous mission, we actually used those 4 sensors. was STS-93. We ran out of gas because we had a fuel leak going up. And so on my previous mission, which was 1999, we had what was called a low-level cut, early MECO, because the force sensor said, out of fuel. Well, normally you shut down at a point in space, so the onboard computers will sense, okay, you're going to the space station, you need to be at a certain inclination and a very specific time and attitude, which includes your pitch and your yaw and all that. There's only 2 times in the history of the shuttle program that we had a low-level cut. The first one was pre-Challenger, where they lost an engine. And then there was STS-93 in 1999. So anyway, we're out in the pad for the return to flight mission. Well, actually, they were running a tanking test because we were in quarantine. Anyway, this long, I'm not going to go through the whole story. They had to change the tank a couple months before. They get the new tank. They still got sensor problems. And so we were going through a lot of pain there. And I know Mike's side and all the shuttle program, they got to make tough decisions. And they don't have the data to make the decisions. You can't turn it over to artificial intelligence and let them make the decisions. You just can't do that. The shuttle program was still a test program, and basically, at that point in time, 114 flights. You're still well into the test of a space vehicle. And so I got to hand it to our managers, the whole shuttle program, because everybody is supporting each other and getting the data. And so I think they made the right decisions all the way along, even though we had that one piece of foam fall off. If you look at the process, I think it was a good process. We just didn't have the data to make the right decisions. And one other thing I should say, before the accident happened, we had a program called Shuttle 2020. And we were going to fly the shuttle through the year 2020, and we were going to do all these upgrades to it. And then the accident happened, and as Mike said, there were people saying, shut it down. We've killed 2 crews. This is stupid. I was 100% against that. And I got very vocal about it. And I said, those 7 people died on Columbia for what? A program that wasn't worth it. You got to shut it down because it wasn't worth it. I said, no, they died in the name of space exploration. Build the space station. Space station gets us ready to go back to the moon. The moon gets us ready to go back to Mars. We got to keep flying. And of course, they came to their senses and we kept the program going. And I think the other reason they kept it going was the international nature. Yes. As Mike mentioned, we had commitments to international, all these countries, that we would build the space station. They were waiting for us to do that. And the other thing is, back in the mid-90s, the space station was approved in Congress by 1 vote. 1 vote. And that was when Dan Golden was the NASA administrator. He earned every one of those votes by going up there and talking to everybody and telling your representatives why it's important to have a space station. And, study, obviously I won't go into that whole thing, but study the human body and the technologies needed to get away from planet Earth and get farther out into the solar system. So I was so happy that the program decided to continue, not just because I wanted to fly again. Forget, I have other things I can do. But I think just it was the right thing to do. Sorry to be so serious. We probably got some funny jokes like the Woodpeckers, too.
Yeah, the shuttle program, when it was approved, and Bob help me if I get this wrong, but the space shuttle program, there was always an intent to build a space station using the space shuttle. And if you look at the major components of the ISS, the shuttle was the only vehicle in the world that could fly those things into space. And we had these agreements with the 16 member nations of the International Space Station program, and so we owed it to them. We had I don't know if they were treaties or just agreements, I don't know, but we had agreements with them to complete the space station. And so even though we had the accident, we had to finish the space station. Shuttle was the only vehicle to do that. And then after that was done, we were told we were going to shut down. But while we were doing that, go design America's next access to space. And that gets into a whole other story that could go on all afternoon. But those are our 3 major goals after the accident: was to return to flight, finish the space station, and then retire the shuttle and move on to the next program, which was called Constellation back then, if some of you may remember.
But obviously, going back to a very critical point in space history, I think we knew at the time Columbia was an important, a critical accident, but it spelled the end of the space shuttle program, which led now to the commercial crew program. So that was really kind of the pivotal point. We didn't realize it at the time how crucial that was going to be to how America's future in space was going to be shaped by that. But quite an interesting period of time to be able to document from two different, very different standpoints here.
Now, I can say one other thing about return to flight. Originally, 114 was a crew exchange, and I mentioned we had Ed Lu and 2 cosmonauts. The day of the accident, they went to Russia, started training for Soyuz. I had 4 crew members. Really, I only had 2, because I mentioned Jim Kelly, but Steve Robinson, my other crew member, was a Keiko for Mike Anderson, who died on Columbia. So it was really just Soichi and I. So for me, it was figure out what we're going to do, and then who's going to be on the mission, and what's the mission going to be. Well, the program decided you're not going to be a crew exchange, you're going to be test flight. They changed us from ULF-1 to LF-1, which I never understood. But we kept calling ourselves 114, which is a lucky number. So I always thought 14 was a lucky number. And we got our 3 crew members. We got, I don't know if you can go back to that, or that one with the crew looking at the boosters. I wanted to introduce, I wanted to introduce my crew. On the far left, if you can see it, Wendy Lawrence. She was a Navy captain, had flown many times. I asked her if she would be in charge of all the logistics transfer. I said, Wendy, she's so good. I go, just go do your job. If you need me, if you got a problem, come and talk to me. But you're on your own, go do your job. And I trusted her through the whole thing. She did great. She was also an arm operator. And then on my, from your right, is Andy Thomas with the blonde hair. He's from Australia, aerospace engineer. And Andy was our arm operator. He led what we called the survey. So the shuttle robot arm was not long enough to go and look under the shuttle to see if there was damage. If you remember, Columbia had damage underneath their left wing where the crew couldn't see it. So we wanted to know if we had damage. Now, this goes way back to right after the accident. So we had an extension. Turned out Canada had another arm up there, spare, and we flew it. So we flew 2 arms. And what we did is we took the regular robot arm, picked up the extension, and we did a survey on flight day 2 of the whole outside of the leading edge of the wings, underneath the wings, and the tiles. And on the end of that spare arm, we had 3 sensors. And they were like radar, LiDAR sensors. And Andy was in charge of that. He did a great job. And then you can't see the 3rd crew member we added, but if you look right in front of Andy's face, you can see Charlie's mustache. But that's Charlie Camarda. He was my only rookie. I asked my boss for 2 rookies. I would give me 3. I'll take 3 new guys. And he said, no. I said, okay, give me 2 new guys. He goes, I'll get back with you. No, he can't have 2 new guys. You can have 1. There was a problem. We kept flying people because, this is such a difficult mission. We can't fly any rookies on it. They were never going to fly because every mission was getting more and more complicated. When I retired, there were 50 astronauts who hadn't even flown 1 mission. And it turned out we only had 18 flights left in the program at that point. So we had to get these rookies flying. And you know what? They did great. I had Charlie. He did great. He did the robot arm. He did the transfer. He did a bunch of other stuff. And some of you might, he's very, I would say, very active now in the space program. So that was my crew. I just thought I'd introduce him to you because, it's not about me. It's about our crew, our team, and the extension of that team. And I'll tell you, they did great. I mean, it made my job really easy. But I thought I'd just give kudos to them. Thanks.
I'm going to just fast forward here very briefly. I don't want to toot my own horn too much here, but you might recognize some of these people here. Folks from this morning here. These are from my first two books about the Apollo program. I interviewed John Tribe and Bob Sieck were the first two people who I talked to writing my books about the Apollo program and really kind of getting a feel for the untold stories. That's one of the things that I really loved with Eileen's book and the book about Columbia was there's so many people who are not high-level, high-profile people, the people doing their everyday job. And that, to me, was the real story. That's the thing I love about the American Space Museum is that it's a lot of stuff about what had to happen behind the scenes for these missions to happen. And so getting to work with John and Bob and JoAnn Morgan and more than 100 other people that I interviewed as part of the Apollo books has been a real honor to do that. And again, I encourage you, if you haven't had a chance to work with somebody else about your memoirs or whatever, at least write them down. Write down some funny stories. Write down some of the things that you're most proud of in your career. And I started off writing the first two books for myself and ended up with a bookshelf full of them. Everybody always asks me, what's my next book? And I have to say the last two just fell out of the sky into my lap. And so I'm not sure what's going to happen, but I wanted to end with that shameless plug. And with that, that will open it up for questions. Okay, thank you guys.
Right here? Okay. Once again, we'd like to gain as many questions as possible, so let's do one question per person. If you have a question for a specific person, please identify that person right in the front. I know you.
What was your debriefing process? Like how did they provide debriefing for all of you after dealing with Columbia?
Debriefing from an emotional perspective?
After people have been to a motor vehicle accident or something, to help with first responders talk about what they're experiencing and how they can move past
Yeah.
without getting like PTSD or something. So I'm curious to know how you, what your role in that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and we were very sensitive to the people's feelings inside the reconstruction hangar especially, because you're dealing with pieces of a vehicle that you love to work on, and you knew what happened to the crew as a result of the accident. We were very, very alert to people and giving them time off if we saw something that they needed to leave the hangar for a period of time. We would take afternoons off where we would just send everybody home because I sensed that the emotions were getting too high. Our public affairs group put together a video about the 107 team and the mission and the astronauts. And I called everybody together and we sat on the floor of the hangar one day, put up a big movie screen, and we showed the movie to everybody and gave copies to everybody. And once the tears stopped flowing, we were done for that day. And so you just have to, we work no weekends. Work no third shifts. We work second shifts, yes, first and second, Monday through Friday. But if someone looked like they needed a break, there was no questions asked. We just gave them time off, and that was one of the things I most looked out for, frankly. And people would open up. We had counselors in the hangar. I remember when we opened up the hangar for the families of the workers at KSC. I think that was in, one was July or something like that, before we boxed all the debris up and put it in the VAB. We opened up the hangar because we wanted the people that worked on the reconstruction, we wanted their families to know what they went through, what they did, what they went through. And so we opened up the hangar and arranged for families to come out on a weekend. We got 11,001 people come out and walk through the hangar. We had counselors on station during that, in case any of the families saw something that really got to them and they needed some help. And so that whole emotional side of it was very, very important. And that was the reason we went to the ball game. And that's, you know, all these other things just to try to keep people together but then when the emotions rose, we took care of it.
In terms of the recovery itself, the astronauts who were involved, they were not allowed to spend more than 3 days out in the field. They had mandatory psychological counseling after the session. The people from Kennedy who went out to do searching, when they came back, they were strongly encouraged to see counselors after that as well.
Yeah, and flight crew ops at Johnson Space Center had counselors available. We were told like every day where they are, you know, send your family. Families were open. Oh yeah, definitely.
And
it was really good.
And for us over at the Visitor Center, we were invited to the SLF where Bob Crippen read a beautiful eulogy for the vehicle, for Columbia. And it wasn't closure, but it was comfort. Yeah. Question here?
On the return to flight, for Mike or Eileen, what was the protocol for should there have been some tiles or damage? Was it a spacewalk, a patch kit, or what was in place?
Well, I'll start. We had to demonstrate repair capability for tiles on orbit, and that was kind of rudimentary, but nevertheless, Eileen and her crew demonstrated that, and it ranged from like a spackle material, if you had a minor ding to a tile, to titanium discs that you could screw down through a tile into the hull in case you had a bigger void, bigger area. But the key thing was, if we'd suffered irreparable damage like we did on Columbia, on the Atlantis mission, we had to have safe haven. We had to have a way to rescue the astronauts from orbit. And with the space station up there, that's relatively easy. You know, all but one mission after Columbia all went to the space station. And so, you know, the astronauts, they could hang out at the space station for months at a time. But we had to have that safe haven capability. And that translated into a timing issue of when do you launch, what's going on at the space station, is there room for another vehicle to dock and all that. But yeah, we had to have that safe haven capability.
And I would add there were three main goals of the return to flight test portion. One, stop foam from falling off the fuel tank. We never did. We couldn't do that. We tried. We did some of it, never got it all figured out. The second one was do repair, like you and Mike went over that. The third was, how do you know you have damage? And that was the inspection. And I mentioned earlier how we had the extension to the arm. We did the survey. We also developed something called the Rendezvous Pitch Around Maneuver, RPM. And this is where I love, this is a great leadership story. If this rendezvous engineer came into a shuttle program meeting before the accident and pitched his idea, they would have thrown him out of the room. That's crazy, get out of here. Well, we had the accident, and he said, brought his idea. He said, well, as we approach the space station, why don't we flip the shuttle around so the astronauts on the station can photograph the bottom of the orbiter. Digital photos, downlink them to mission control. What a great idea. I mean, we did it, and it was beautiful. It was like ballet. And we could have, it took us a year and a half to develop it, but we could have done it a lot faster. But it was perfect. Every flight after Columbia, with the exception of that one Hubble mission, every flight did the RPM maneuver. And we actually found we had gap fillers, which are these little, y'all probably know what gap fillers are in between the tiles. 2 of them popped out on our flight, and we had to do a spacewalk, go underneath, pull the gap fillers out. And that turned out to be pretty simple. And so, you know, your question was really kind of on repair. Is pulling gap fillers out a repair? Well, it's not a traditional repair, but it's kind of a repair. So you could say we did the first tile repair on orbit by pulling out those gap fillers. And no one had been EVA under the shuttle before until Steve Robinson went under on the end of the arm. And I remember he goes in the airlock, we suit him up, and I said, Steve, do not pull a tile out. I said, please, my parting word to you, do not pull a tile out. He goes, don't worry, boss, I'm not going to pull a tile out. And so we watched him at his helmet cam. We watched him do that, and he did great. And end of story. I don't know if another gap filler popped out the next 18 missions or so. The whole story behind that, but I'm done.
Question here?
What are your 4 steps for processing and learning from mistakes? Since it's not in your book.
Admit your mistake. Fix your mistake. Do something to prevent it from happening again. And then the 4th is move on. And the 4th is very important. People like me that dwell on my mistakes. It's stupid. It's like the athlete that's thinking about the last mistake he made, and he goes and he makes another one. And you got to get your head back in the game. And we would do debriefs after each run. We do ascent runs, entry runs. We do debrief. And if my crew did perfect, I'd call the instructors and say, make it harder. They're not making any mistakes. Make it harder. Because they learn by mistakes. I learn by mistakes.
Why is 14 lucky?
You know what? I've always liked the number. But it's 7, it's twice as lucky as 7.
Question right over here.
Yes, hi. I actually had a question for Eileen. What was Charlie's contribution to your STS-114 mission? What did he do? What did he do, and what did he contribute towards it?
Yeah, so his question is on what did Charlie Camarda, my crew member, what was his kind? No, went through that pretty quick. Sorry, Charlie, if you're listening. We didn't get a good look at the picture of him either, but so Charlie was a rookie. He hadn't flown before, so we got him as our rookie. He was, first of all, for the skills, he was an arm operator. So he was was actively involved in doing the survey. But the other thing he did that was most of the mission was transfer. So we took up 5,000 pounds of stuff because the space station hadn't been resupplied by the shuttle for 2.5 years. And I'll tell you, John Phillips, who was up there, kept calling us in the office, which was cool. I thought the space station called our office phone. It's like, he'd say, bring me coffee, bring me coffee. We're out of coffee up here. What are we going to do? We're like, John, we got the coffee for you. So it's the first thing we gave to him. But Charlie was in charge of the transfer of all, and we had that big MPLM, which is a logistics module. And we've put all that stuff on the station, and then we took all their garbage and we put it in the MPLM, brought it back home. So Charlie was very fast. He was like, he wasn't even like a rookie. He just boom, boom, boom. He's going to work. And the other thing he did, he is a expert on heat shields. I loved having him on the crew, even though he didn't do anything. Well, he did a couple tests on the mission, so we did a couple operational tests on how we would repair, like that thing that Mike talked about. Charlie was in charge of that little plug thing, and but the best thing that Charlie did was talk to the engineers and the managers about heat shields, repair of heat shields, and what are we going to do if we have some kind of damage. So it was really important having him on the flight because of his background and experience. He was a great crew member. He also kept us laughing.
Yeah.
Somebody had
Back here.
I love the aspect of that after process, but the community's always come out to help in disasters. A lot of that's not covered. I'm glad you did that. But what were some of the good memories that you may have had from any of that process, the Texas aspect of it?
Well, the good memories are that everybody came together seamlessly, and there was no bickering between the agencies. We had federal, state, local, we had volunteer agencies. We had over, I believe the number is 140 different agencies represented in helping with the recovery of the debris. And people would show up and just ask, what can I do? There was never any kind of power play. I should say right up front, there was a question about who was going to be overall in charge of the recovery of the vehicle, whether it was going to be FEMA or EPA or NASA, and that got worked out by the White House, and we got our marching orders that NASA was in charge of the whole operation, and our Associate Administrator Bill Reedy at the time asked Dave King from the Marshall Space Flight Center, used to work here, of course. He was Deputy Director of Marshall at the time, I believe, or maybe he was Director, I'm not quite sure. But he led the whole effort out in Texas. So we had a diverse group of people show up. Everybody was just there as good Americans that wanted to help NASA and help us recover the debris and the astronauts in order to get us back to flight. So it worked extremely well, actually, considering how many different agencies were involved.
You know, it's always interesting also to find these unintended consequences or these, you know, it's kind of like the Michael Crichton things, the little things that go wrong in the system. And one of the things that really surprised me in doing the research was finding out that databases almost brought the whole project to a halt. EPA had their own database, FEMA had their own database, NASA had their own database, and the debris was showing up being triple counted in some cases. And so things had to be stopped until the databases could all be coordinated and cleaned up and then move forward from there. Little things like that you just don't take into account.
Yeah, that was a pain in the...
Yeah.
Question here?
Question for Mike and Eileen. There was the image of you inspecting the external tank for the return to flight, but for a typical mission, what's the interaction and dynamic between a launch director and the shuttle crew?
Well, I'll go first. It might surprise you. It's not as much as you might think. Obviously, we know who the crew is. They show up for TCDT Day, which is a training day about 3 weeks prior to the mission. We go through training with them, a mock countdown, take them all the way down to T-minus 5 seconds and cut off the vehicle there. We have a nice dinner with them out at the beach house, the sole remaining house on the beach. And that's important from a interpersonal relationship. You get to know the commander and the rest of the crew personally, and that helps. You would come out for OPF rollout when the vehicle left the orbiter processing facility to go over to the vehicle assembly building. Crew would show up for that. I should say, too, one of the findings of the Challenger accident was that the crews didn't come to KSC as much as the people that wrote the report thought they should. And so after Challenger, we saw a lot more interaction for the astronauts that would come over to KSC and walk around, just talk to the technicians and the engineers and shake hands and just talk about their kids and try to get across to the workforce that Eileen's a tremendous pilot and an astronaut, but she's a regular person with a family and kids. And so that's the point of getting to know them, so that when you're doing your work on that vehicle, whatever your job is, you do it to the best of your ability, because 7 lives are on the line. And that hits home even more when you know them. And so after Challenger, we had a lot more interaction with the crew. But they're stationed in Houston. They do most of their training in Houston, and so we see them a couple of times before the mission. Yeah.
I'll add to that. I did this job down here called Cape Crusader. Oh, yeah. Now at Kennedy Space Center, they call it ASP, Astronaut Support Person. But in Houston, we call the job Cape Crusader, which is kind of cute. But I did that job all of 1992 and almost all of 1993. And Mike was a NASA test director back then. You and Al Sofji were NTD, so I got to know both of them way back then. Because I was down here at least 3 days a week, and I was down here with the flight crews, and when they launched and landed, airlock checkout, we'd go sit in the orbiter, throw switches, test the brakes, test the hydraulics, and it was a really fun job. So I think I got to know Bob Sieck was a launch director in, I think it was 1992. He had meetings at 7:30 every morning. Do you remember that? And I would go to his meetings when I was here. So I would get to know them that way, but not every astronaut is a Cape Crusader. But if you have a crew, you normally have at least 2 people on a crew that did that job. So that's like our connection. And then we had something called the Vehicle Integration Test Team, or the VIT. And they were our eyes and ears down here at the Cape. So if I need to talk to a launch director, I call the VIT. Hey, can you get us launch director? Boom, there you go. Or the NTD or whoever. So I think it worked out really good.
Well, and you had crew members go to the other facilities too, like up to Marshall the other sites too. So it wasn't just KSC. You got spread out to get to know all the workers, not just here.
We said it was like Disneyland down here, so go to Disneyland.
It is the happiest place on earth, after all.
We got time for a couple more questions right there, young lady.
So I read Bringing Columbia Home a few years ago, and for someone who can get through a book very, very quickly, I have to admit I had to stop a lot because it was a very wrenching read, beautiful book. So my question is, for Mike and Jonathan, how difficult was it? Did you find yourselves having to stop? And how did you get your 2,000 words a day when I could barely get through 2,000 words a day reading it? And then on the other hand, you had Eileen, who was kind of a reluctant writer. So I just wonder how that dynamic worked.
I'm trying to go back to the question. Yeah, I mean, for me, I mean, part of the problem was just, it was like a fire hose of information, especially, I didn't put a picture on here, but this was like, how did I organize? For me, the hardest thing was the day one, the day of the accident, when you had things going on here at the Cape. You had the pieces of the shuttle falling out of the sky in Texas. You had Dave King flying from Huntsville to, he didn't even know where he was going when he got in the airplane. You had FEMA, the FBI, all converging on the scene. How do you tell this story in real time without it getting too confusing? And so I mean, this was an old school thing I ended up doing, was just printing out interviews and then just cutting them into strips and putting them on my kitchen table and putting it into timeline format and then putting it together that way was the only way I could make it happen. But it was, and I was not personally involved in it, and still I had talked to these people face to face, and I knew them from just having looked in their eyes while they were telling me their stories, and so it became very, very personal to me just to put this together that way. Yeah, very, very tough to write it out, but the book I had read before I started writing this book was Unbroken by Margaret Hillenbrand, and to me, her writing was the epitome of the story is exciting enough in itself that you don't need to embellish this whatsoever. All you have to do is just tell exactly what happened. And so that's how it got me through the book, was to be able to do that, at least with Columbia.
Yeah, and I know with me, from a personal perspective, I think I mentioned it, I started writing a book about 5 years after the accident. I just couldn't, it was too soon, I couldn't do it. And then when Jonathan and I met and we decided to give it a go, I had notes that I kept from the mission and from my time out in Texas, and that helped a lot. Personal notes to my wife, because I was out there and she was back home by herself, and so that added to the emotional aspect of it. But taking notes was important, and so I was able to recreate things that happened out there that I'd forgotten about. So yeah, I dealt with it that way.
And just very quickly, I'll say, I was only a reluctant writer for my book. When they asked me to write something for Bringing Columbia Home, I immediately said yes. Is that right? I think I immediately said yes, because it's a chance for me to honor the crew, people I knew. And that was very different from writing a book about myself, which I was reluctant for.
I remember when we were writing the book, we talked about who should write the prologue and the epilogue, and there was just no question who the two should be. And you were it.
We've got time for one more question, and Bob Sieck, did you have something for us?
Well, for Mike, the launch scrubs are part of the business, and they're all a bummer when they happen, and it's usually technical or weather or something like that. What was the most frustrating launch scrub for you this launch scrub?
The most frustrating launch scrub? There were so many.
We scrubbed about half the time, as I remember. We had that data. We scrubbed about half the time, and for a scrub, about 2/3 of that was for weather. So weather was always a pain. Most frustrating launch scrub, I don't know. You know well that it's just part of the business. You know, you're in the control room, everybody's dressed up, the astronauts are on board, and TV cameras are rolling, and then you have to call a scrub. Well, it's disappointing, sure, but it's just part of the business because you don't lift off until you know that you're ready to go. If it took 3 times, it took 3 times. If you launched on the first try, that was fine too. The team got very good at scrubbing. And
yeah, and I remember Mike's voice. Well, we're just not going to make it today, and you know, it's like it's still echoing. I'm like, oh no, okay, crew, pretend this is training. We're going to be even better tomorrow.
Well, one of the things that Mike told me was that he said his job as launch director was to keep the vehicle on the ground, basically because it's safe there, and you have to convince me that it's safe to take off.
Yeah, the way that works is on launch day, to launch the space shuttle, there were 22,000 parameters that had to be correct. And that's what the launch team did. They monitored all 22,000 parameters. And then it came down to the final launch decision by the launch director. And we made our decision based on our 7 friends sitting on top of that rocket. And does it feel good to me today to give them the go? All those technical parameters could be perfect. But if there was something bugging me or Bob down deep, then we would keep them on the ground. We would have to explain why we kept them on the ground in the face of everything else being go. But nevertheless, that's the purpose of the launch director. You need that one human being in the process to give it that final gut check, that final sanity check that, yeah, it feels good today. I get asked a question every now and then, well, did I ever scrub just because it didn't feel right? I said, no, I never had to do that. It might have been fun. It would have been my last launch. But no, I never had to do it. I was fully trained to do that, fully prepared to do it. I would have called a no-go if I didn't feel right in a heartbeat.
Well, in just a moment, we're going to set up with a photo opportunity with our panel here. And we want to thank you all very much for participating. You guys have been magnificent throughout, and we thank you very much. Before we do this, however, we're going to close out with Marquette.
Thank you, Mr. Nick Thomas. We are actually live on our YouTube channel, American Space Museum, and we wanted to take us out in a proper way. But I just wanted everybody to know that it's such a pleasure to put this on. We're glad you all enjoy it. The American Space Museum has 4 paid employees, and about 7 volunteers helped us here. None more than Connie McDaniel, Julie Clay, Matthew Raj, and Bill Whiting, and I'll name some others off here later. Oh, Joseph Adams out there. So we wanted live to recognize our small staff that put this together for you, because we got the passion to keep this thing rolling and rolling. Thank you. And of course, Nick Thomas and others in the background we bragged about throughout the 3 days, from 1 day to 3 days worth of ShuttleFest. So we wanted to go out on our YouTube channel with something special. That I've got Terry White, who's on our Stay Curious episode all the time, and Bob Sieck are going to roll out the 30th legacy poster of the Hubble that was done, printed out, that we won an award during pre-COVID. Go ahead, guys, and roll it out. I'm going to cover up our beautiful panel here for a second. Bob, we want you to come up with the pictures too. And Don Thomas is still here, so is Joe Tanner. We want you to come up for the photo op. But look at this beautiful piece of science that doctorate theses have been written on this thing over and over, called the Cosmic Reef, okay? And you on TV watching this. So as people are getting their cameras out with Terry and Bob Sieck there, Bob's going to be on our show some more. He's over his honeymoon from beautiful Linda. He's married there. So, yeah, Don, get up there. Don, you get up there. Why don't you all stand up there and get in front of there? Yeah. And we've got Joe. Come on up here, Joe. A special moment here for Stay Curious on our thing there. Get up there inside there, and I got one other addition. He told me he forgot it. Yeah, I knew where it was. So thank everybody here alive on this show. I have an outtake that some of you know, and that is we can't wait to see you at ShuttleFest 5 to what? Bridge the space between us. Thank you so much. Woo-hoo!